the early phases, when we first started talking to Atlassian, and we were talking to other companies as well. We had like a scrappy startup. We were having some success. Some of the things that we most valued were our culture. We had won awards for culture. Our people were really happy. I think we won the Fortune Best Small Company to Work for in America, actually. And so like our culture was really strong. And I'd been through, as you mentioned, I've been through some acquisitions that were tough from a cultural perspective and from an incentive perspective. And so I was very focused on like, can we find a culture that fits? So those early conversations and relationships were really important. And another thing that you and I haven't talked about, but I was thinking more about too, we had a 10-year BHAG, and we had put so much of our energy into getting everybody lined up behind this one big goal, a 10-year goal, massive thing for us to go out and accomplish. And one of the cool things I was looking for is like, we need to find a place where we can continue that work, like somebody who embraces that work, because it's going to be really hard to say, hey, we're 5 years into this journey and now we're going to do something different. And so I was looking for those things. And maybe the third thing on the early stages for the people, just making sure that those people who had worked so hard over 5 years could have a good financial outcome, which can be a complicated part of an acquisition, but just making sure that there was a way to do it where we maximized reward for the employees for what they'd done so far, and also future reward for what we were going to go do kind of in the second phase of the company. And so, trying to line all those things up was a big focus for me in early conversations. And when I met Atlassian for the first time, and when I met Cameron Deach, our deal sponsor, he was the first person I kind of talked to. That's kind of what I had in the back of my head. Like, these are kind of the things I want to make sure that are solid. And, Cameron started telling me about their values and their culture and really good alignment to what we were doing and our values. And one thing that was interesting, on the first day we announced the acquisition, the president of the company came in and he said he had mapped the Atlassian values to our values and said, look how close these are, look how well aligned this is. And so those things, those may not sound like big things, but those are huge for making that journey continue in a strong way. And so we had really, I think we've only had one or two people leave on their own over a year. And so it's been a really positive journey from that perspective. And I think what made it work was it was open, it was transparent, it was very collaborative. In the early stages, Atlassian made sure that I met anybody I wanted to, right? So I somewhere in the neighborhood of 78 to 80 people before the acquisition had relationships with, which is a ton of access. They let me talk to CEOs who had just gone through an acquisition with Atlassian and let me ask them anything I wanted. And that was super helpful because, you have questions as a CEO. I was a first-time CEO, so there's a lot I didn't know. And, talking to other CEOs who had just gone through it was huge. So all that openness, that culture fit that was the early stage stuff I was looking for. And then when you start getting into okay, well, how's this deal really going to work? What kind of that mid-stage planning? One of the things that the M&A team did what really well was come in and like take a really open role to like, what's going to happen to people's roles? How are these products going to fit in? So we were looking for product fit and roadmaps and where products overlap. And I was impressed with all of that planning. And a lot of times in other acquisitions, we kind of had some idea about what would happen, but there was kind of like, well, we'll figure the rest of it out later. And I think really thinking through how this affects people's careers and where things were going to go, not just 6 months in, but 18 months in, 24 months in, like we did some of that high level thinking through the vision and not making hard plans. I think that would be an anti-agile pattern, but just kind of laying out, is this good product fit? Is this good people and culture fit? And so one thing that was interesting there was just like, a lot of times what's hard for an acquisition, I think, is what do you do with a CEO like myself? Like, you bring somebody in, they've been making all the decisions. They're usually serial entrepreneurs. How do you give them a career at a company who's already got CEOs, right? And so had open conversations about that. Like, look, we want you to run this part of the business. We want you to have a career here. Atlassian was like, we want you to be here, past your vesting, right? And that, I thought that was super refreshing. I was like, that's great. That's what I want. I don't want to, I think for serial entrepreneurs, a lot of times they think they'll build something and sell it. And kind of one of the tips I've learned over the years is, if you're building something, you need to be very prepared mentally to have 3 to 5 years after you sell it to hand it off and to get it on a growth path at a minimum. And what was refreshing about this, we were talking like, well, maybe there's a path beyond 3 to 5 years even, and that was refreshing. I was like, this is what I'm looking for. This is fantastic. And then just a couple more points, just on the late stage, when you start getting into the thousands of details around how to put a deal together, term sheets and all that stuff. Like in prior acquisitions, we had earnouts, and they're like, hey, 18 months in, if you guys hit X revenue goal or some sort of goal, then you'll get more money. And we talked about that early, and one of the things that I thought was impressive is they're like, hey, we're not going to do an earnout because that's not really a good agile pattern. And I fully agree, because the business will shift, we'll learn, and we don't want to be fixed on a goal that may not be best for the business. And so not doing an earnout and figuring out other ways to make sure people were incentivized to get in and like learn together and drive the best outcomes we can, but not try to set in stone what the world's going to look like 18 months out is really important. So COVID's a good example. When we did this, if we would have set an 18-month goal, we wouldn't have known about COVID. There's a whole slew of other things and product decisions, other acquisitions we wouldn't have known about to plan for. And so that plus the open, transparent term sheet. I don't know how many of you are aware of this, but Atlassian actually put their term sheet out there for other entrepreneurs to see. So if you're ever going to be acquired by Atlassian, their terms are out there in the public domain, which is, I think, pretty rare. And they were in the process of putting it out when we were going through our acquisition, and they were like open, like, look, this is what we do. We're not gaming you here. This is how we operate. And so all of that was just fantastic. And then I know I'm going on here. If you want me to talk a little bit about post-acquisition and kind of an agile approach to the post-acquisition, I love the way we married the M&A team. A lot of times in prior acquisitions, the M&A team did their job. They'd hang around for a few months, 6 months, whatever, and try to make sure it's transitioned, and then they were off to the next one. And the team here was smart enough to realize it's going to take 18 months to really get this thing integrated well and off and running. So they were in it with us, but when we decided how are we going to do this going forward, we looked at it with a very agile approach. Like, we're going to learn as we go, but we're going to learn together. So we've got full executive sponsorship on that steering committee. The M&A teams in the steering committee, the business teams are in the steering committee. So we've just kind of looked at it, month to month, looking at where problems are popping up and solving them in an agile way. So I think the best evidence that it's working is I'm still really enjoying my work and having a ball. And a lot of times, 12 months into an acquisition, that's not the case. So I could go on, but I'll pause there. It's a long answer, but you asked me a hard question.
I appreciate you just outlined the whole interview for me. This is great. I heard a lot of good themes too around culture and values, how it was aligned, how the company Atlassian was very open and transparent from the get-go. They actually let you talk to other CEOs of companies they acquired. BHOG, of those of you not familiar with it, Big Hairy Audacious Goal. I forget what book that came out of, but sort of thinking about this real long-term vision you had for the company and how you saw that vision still able to continue to thrive even post-transaction. And then obviously post-close transparency in terms of this is what's going to happen after the deal. So it seems like those are some really key factors into making this happen. The earnout point is actually a really good one because there's got to be a lot of feuds going on about earnouts going right now with everything going on. What would you say Atlassian specifically did to make the integration process as smooth as possible? And you can pretend Christina's not here listening.
Yeah. I would never pretend that Christina is not here. So yeah, I think there was quite a bit in there. One was I think we took a really realistic look at resourcing, and when you're looking for triple digit growth from a business, I think we did a nice job of like thinking through what do we really need to scale the business in terms of human capital, right? And so I think that's another area where in other acquisitions we've tripped up. So the integration team was actually the ones championing, they were the champions for us to get the right amount of headcount, to get extra resources, especially at least in the first 12 months, to make sure that we were scaling in a healthy way, right? Not trying to just say, hey, we're going to do double the amount of business, but we're going to keep the headcount, slowly growing. And we had, they did a good job of recognizing too that, as a startup, we were running really thin. And so thinking, hey, we're going to help you put an extra layer in there of people to make sure that not only can you handle the integration, but you can also keep growing the business. There was just a lot of recognition of that, and I think it was an experienced M&A team between the folks that we have who had done a lot of acquisitions, so they just realized those things. So part of what they did was just they took the long view and said, look, if we're going to get to this goal in 3 years, we got to really overinvest in the first year. So that was one thing we did that I thought really helped us get off to a good start. And then the rest of it was just we used the Atlassian tool set internally, which was really good for just making sure that we had really transparent communication. So a lot of what our tool sets focus on is just like, it's ultra communicative. So like at first it was actually overwhelming how much information was coming our way. And then after a few weeks of working in that kind of an environment, we were like, oh, okay, it's just a flow of consciousness of all the things going on, all the things people need, and anybody can jump into those streams and talk. And so I think just keeping it open and having a long view were some of the key things I think made the integration get off to a good start. And then also, like I said, we just kept the cadence. Like we didn't get 6 months in and say all good. Like things were going good 6 months in, but we didn't stop. We're like, we know there'll be new growth challenges as this thing scales, so we're going to stay on it longer than most in my experience.
Christina, when you go through an integration of a growth company, I feel like there's a big challenge because obviously the company already is enduring growing pains as a company that's going through high growth. But then you're also trying to integrate the company and manage that big order of change management. How did you create an environment that fostered success for both sides?
Yeah, there's a lot of great things that Steve mentioned. One of the ones that he just started to talk about was around having the long view. I think being the first person in Atlassian focused on integration, there's a reason why M&A integration is not my title. It is strategic operations, because we really want to look at these acquisitions in more of a partnership mode and helping them to stand up their operations and grow roots in the company long term. And so that just requires a lot more different strategy around not thinking of it as just integration, but building that right foundational layer for them to be able to flourish in the company. So one is just having that agile and adaptable kind of integration approach. And for Agile Craft, what Steve didn't really kind of show what was behind the scenes was Agile Craft was meant to be, or was in some people's mind to be, a much more difficult acquisition than it actually was. They are, so Atlassian is a company, we're headquartered in Australia. We have presence in 13 countries. Our products are around project and work management. So Jira, Trello, Confluent are some of the key ones in Jira line now. But we have traditionally been a completely flywheel-based or self-service-based set of tools. So no sales team. Jira Line came with a full sales-led motion team. They were primarily remote. We were primarily kind of office and center of excellence based. They were focused on enterprise customers. We were focused more on individuals and selling to teams. And they were a Microsoft shop, and we're like the complete opposite of that. So in all these key pillars, we were going, wow, this is going to be some interesting mix of things, and how are we going to do it? But we put it on what I call my compatibility matrix. And I don't know if Steve, I've ever showed you this, but it was kind of like these bars where we said, what are the things that we think are part of our secret sauce of Atlassian? And where is Jira Line? Where are we? And where do we hope to be together? And we just put that on the table for even orienting Atlassian to, kind of welcoming Agile Craft. And we put a lot of focus first on kind of getting the mindset right of Atlassian, of this is going to be a different type of company with a different type of sales motion, different type of focus. And so once we got kind of that set in our mind, we were ourselves more open to change. They're going to help us establish new processes we've never had. They're probably going to, contradict or create some friction maybe of how we do the deal process or how we kind of work through some of our business or product practices. But because we were ready for that, we were more okay, and we were able to adapt and be more agile in our integration approach. So I think that was, one of the key things that we did first. The second, as Steve mentioned, was being part of the team, being part of Agile Craft for a longer period of time. And myself specifically, I kind of consider myself as like the cousin of the team, where I come in, I've gotten to know a lot of them. I've been to their offsites, go to the office, and I really tried to immerse myself in the culture, as well as, my boss, our head of corp dev. We really tried to, learn the people, understand, the challenges of the business, help them navigate and even advocate maybe behind the scenes. Steve may not even know a lot of the side conversations we're having, trying to help, champion some of the resources or alignment and things that we need to clear the path for, him and his team to be successful. And so I think by immersing yourself in the culture and not being bound to a fixed timeline of when you're going to get in and out of the integration really helped us adapt to what the needs were and what the team needed from us. And so like I hear a lot about, the first 100 days and, that's what our integration plan covers. And then it starts to taper off. And I believe the complete opposite, which is as long as I can stay with the deal and continue to add value, that's how long I'll stay. So I think it's been about a year now, and I've just started to slowly kind of more fade to the background because I feel like, they've been solid and good and they have roots now that can help them thrive. And part of that is also, as Steve mentioned, our product set. So Atlassian's product set is about managing work and information. And our mission for the company is to unlock the potential of teams. And so when they come in and they're using our products that we sell to the market, and we're able to share information freely and we're able to make decisions quickly, that has helped build a lot of transparency and trust, where I think typically there's a lot of walls of like, just that information not being readily available to everyone. And so especially for a team that's coming off of, Microsoft email, Microsoft Teams, a whole new stack, and into this world, just feeling like, oh, wow, we're starting to learn all these new things. I think for them, it was too much information at the beginning, but then once they got their initial hurdle of just learning how to use things, it really helped accelerate like their onboarding and knowing who do I contact for what purpose, what are the different processes, and how do we, help navigate the organization. And then with that focus on tools also came to focus on people. And that's, I think, like the most important part we started out first was Steve mentioned that even before the deal closed, he met somewhere between like 75 and 80 people. And what we did also as an integration team was we had a leadership kind of kickoff or summit in San Francisco a couple weeks before the deal even closed. And we brought all of our functional leaders together with their counterpart in Jira line and just started to get to know each other for a week. And we just said, we've gone through the diligence phase where we fired, you with like 100 questions, and now's your turn to learn about us. So we're going to share, what Atlassian's about and how we run our teams, and you're going to share a little bit more about who you are. And we're going to bring everyone together so that you can start to formulate that joint view of how you're going to be successful together and start to formulating what those goals and OKRs are, so that objectives and key results. And so from the start, even before the deal closed, people knew who they were going to be partnering with, what their teams were like, what goals they were focused on, and started to define together what that joint success was. And even I think to this day, Steve has commented that he's still really surprised by how much tight partnering there is, just across the company, people willing to reach, even outside of their team and help each other. And I think a lot of that was just set from the start of defining the vision together, even at the team level, and then building those goals and targets together.
Wow, it's really interesting. I can't imagine somebody replacing the whole stack. Sorry, go ahead, Steve.
I was going to add one little bit of color just to kind of put a cherry on top of that. So like one thing that was impressed me is like Christina, like you would expect the M&A team to learn about the product that they're acquiring, and they absolutely did that. But then after the acquisition, we had these 2-week boot camps that we put partners through, and that literally trained them to like fully configure, implement, run, train on the product. So this is like 2 weeks of like crazy training, like deep training all day.
Wow.
And Christina signed up for it and sat through it. And she was in it, like learning the product, learning the customer pain, learning how, challenges the partners were going to have with rolling this out. So just that level of immersion into what we were doing was impressive to me, because then it's not just superficial integration stuff like, hey, how are we going to get you off this system onto this system? They were in there to understand the business as well. So it was a good partner. It was a good partnering. I hadn't seen that level of jumping into to understanding what we were doing before.
Christina, how do you drive an open and collaborative work environment?
One.
And two, are you like the fun cousin, or are you the one that really straightens people up?
Oh, I'm the fun cousin, for sure. The Georgetown office is like, yeah, the fun cousin's coming. Got the corporate card, woo! She's got an integration budget with her. So that helps. But no, I mean, it's hard to talk to your line because they just come with such energy and such passion about what they do that it's infectious. So it's easy to be that way. How we drive it, one, I think as Atlassian, our operating mode is default open. Like our products are designed that way. So Confluence, which is like our information management kind of content authoring and inventory, management system, it's default open. And so when you come into the company, any page you create is open for anyone to see. And that seems like a thing, but it's just such a different mind shift to know, like, you're writing something, you save it, you close it, someone will get a ping or start commenting on your page of like, hey, where'd you get that data? Or can you share this with me? And you're like, wow, oh my God, this is really open. This person's from Australia. I don't even know them, but they're interested in this topic. So I think that really helps. That helped me pave the way for how I designed kind of our integration strategy overall. Prior to Atlassian, I was at Salesforce, and trust was their number one value. And they were very, open. But this level of openness was just on just kind of a different level that I had to orient, so that it seemed like we were part of the fabric of the company. So one is just our products lend itself that way. Two, we're very much an open and sharing culture. So that really helps too. But I think also we got a little bit lucky with Jira Line because being an Agile company, they were already pre-oriented to be Agile and transparent and open. So when we came with, hey, here's our, the product strategy and the vision, but part of this, maybe 20, 30%, we're going to have to define together. They were open to us, kind of partnering together to, come up with the actual plan and the details around that. So we used a couple ways of our product, like I said, partnering people up together with their partners and having shared goals amongst them to say, your defined success is what you're going to achieve together, at the functional level. So like from this customer support side, from sales, from services and enablement, all the way down to, the technology integration and security compliance all the way down the road. That fostered a lot. And then, we had just a lot of the typical integration program kind of governance checkpoints that we do. We have a weekly integration leads meeting. Steve was part of a steering committee with all of the functional heads of, sales, support, the deal sponsor, et cetera, which was really great because I found that helped clear the way for a lot of quick decision making, which is also, an Agile pattern, and just very quick alignment. And so a lot of things that, one of the downsides of having products and tools where you can create a lot of information and disseminate it to, the masses is that sometimes that slows down decision making because there's so much consensus building and commentary that you feel like you have a need to respond to. This just accelerated it really to a strong, really tight-knit leadership team that could just kind of work through things very quickly.
Was there anything else specific to get alignment between the acquirer and acquiree company being acquired?
One thing we did that was new with Jira Line, Steve alluded to it a little bit, was we did a really tight handoff between the deal model, our deal team, and integration side. So we did almost like translating the deal model into an operating plan. So that was, what are our revenue targets we need to hit? What are our key functions that we need to bake into this integration strategy in terms of how much our partners are going to contribute to bookings? How many quota carrying sales reps are we going to have? How much is headcount going to grow? All of these things in the deal model we translated into an operating plan, which became a set of OKRs, metrics, and then also walk Steve and his leadership team through it. All of us together on both sides. And we found in the past that has been kind of a bit of a black box. When the integration teams goes, I know the vision, but I don't actually know what we're being measured on in terms of success. And we were being very transparent about that. And that, I think, forced a lot of alignment because people knew what where the goalposts were. And then it was up to them to just figure out that plan together, how they're going to get there.
I know one thing we talked about previously around Agile, just having that level of agility, being highly responsive and iterative in terms of the way you plan things. How did you enable an iterative live plan?
Well, we had a combination of, we started at the same time that we were acquiring AgileCraft, a set of this concept that you and I talked about a lot about, which is our playbooks, our game plans in place. So we have plays that describe, for any given functional, whether it be process integration or systems integration, like a play that we define that says, here's how we're going to get there, A to Z. And then based on the AgileCraft acquisition, we had pulled together a series of plays to become that game plan. With AgileCraft, it was a little different than some of our other acquisitions that are from our marketplace, where we kind of know the recipe, we can, it's repeatable, it's something that we can get in and out of very quickly. For Agile, because they were creating almost like a net new part of our business model, we were defining a lot of that for the first time. So how we did that was just a lot of tight collaboration with them and also a lot of patience on their part, because I think they had felt probably some frustration of, well, why Atlassian don't you already have this? And what we had really tried to explain to them was that a lot of this, you are helping to define our future vision together. So we enabled it, I think, just by writing the book together. A lot of these things we didn't have on, how are we going to enable an enterprise sales team? How we were going to truly, unlock the channel on this type of very new complex product. Those were things that we did together. And so we had a structure of good governance at the functional team level that then rolled up to our overall kind of integration leadership team. We would do things like monthly OKR and metrics reviews together as a leadership team, while having that weekly steerco. Steve still had his Jira line, leadership checkpoints as well. So there were, for us, which is a highly matrixed company, there were a lot of different checkpoints at these intersections of teams, just really trying to hash out problems together, kind of move forward on progress. And then all along the way, we were sharing information and just continuing to, kind of iterate on our plans together.
How about tools and techniques have you used to improve communication and information management?
Tools, Atlassian tool set. I mean, using Jira to capture our OKRs and some of our work, the technical work, and we're in the process of transitioning to Jira Align for our company-wide OKR management, and we'll eventually move there to our whole portfolio management. Confluence for creating all of our rich documentation and kind of dashboards for company and project progress. And then also some teams prefer to use Trello. So a lot of those kind of lighter weight teams who are tracking less complex projects are using Trello as well. So we've got a pretty rich tool set that kind of contributes to that.
At any point, does Steve suggest using AgileCraft for managing the integration?
Oh yes, absolutely. Yeah, we're talking. We're that's part of why I attended the boot camp. Was I said there will be a day where we are using Jira Line for integration, and we're starting, I think, in a couple months with getting the company on it to start with our top level goals and objectives, and then once we get that motion going, it'll be no doubt we start tracking M&A in there as well.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. For those of you not familiar with Jira Align, it's taken Agile, really designated for small teams, but allowing series of teams to be able to roll up for a larger enterprise. That sound about right, Steve?
Yeah, you got it. That's pretty good. Yeah, just taking all the work that's happening across the organization and trying to map it to the outcomes that you want to achieve. So taking your OKRs or your goals or whatever the company's driving and making sure that the work that's happening is lined up towards one of those goals, and then measuring, is this work we're doing actually moving the needles that we want to move, right? So we're doing this work, we think it's going to help us get revenue, increase adoption, increase customer satisfaction. Is it? And the idea is, if we can understand the correlation between the work we're doing and the goals we have, we can kind of halt, pivot, or persevere on that work much faster, because we understand, we're not allocating work for quarters on end or for the whole year. We're going in as with a learning opportunity, saying we think if we do this, it'll work, and then rapidly delivering work and understanding, is it driving the value we thought? And if not, we have the ability to pivot resources, funding, whatever, towards as much value as possible. So it's kind of that agile, it's enterprise agility is what we're trying to help companies get to with the Align product.
Yeah, and it seems like a great use case for M&A integration. So if any DealRoom engineers are paying attention, I would take note, possible integration there. Anyways, how do you see company culture change during integration, if at all? Did you implement any agile principles specifically at that time?
Yeah, I can talk about some of what we did. So we were already in kind of like a pretty agile way of thinking. So when we would talk about roadmaps or planning, we had, the longest range that we would talk about was usually 3 quarters. And it was kind of now, next, later planning. And the now version is like, hey, we're 80% sure in this next quarter, this is what we're going to do, but we reserve the right to adjust based off what we're learning. And then, the next version, so what we're going to do the quarter after this one, we're 50% certain on that. And then the quarter after that, we're 25% certain on that one. And so, like, enforcing with our customers and the whole planning process, that we're not setting out in stone what we're going to be doing. We're going to learn. We're going to go out, take every hypothesis we have and validate it as fast as possible. And then the work will fill in from there. And so we took that approach from the beginning. That's kind of something we were driving before. It became a lot more powerful as a construct as a large public software company, right? So in a startup, some things are just much easier. Moving into that matrixed organization, those agile practices of how we think about planning became a lot more powerful, because we needed them to survive with that level of information flow. And there's so many, in an agile company like Atlassian, there's a lot going on. So just lining it all up and making sure that the products and the visions and the roadmaps all line up. All of that stuff that we've been selling to customers kind of became something we needed, even, in a much more intense way than we did before, when we were, 100 people, basically. Does that make sense?
Yeah. How'd you see agile techniques improve the integration process?
Yeah, so I think that those techniques of just kind of looking at everything with a hypothesis and a learning approach, it's perfect for integration, because there's a lot of stuff the integrations never go exactly the way you think, right? So even examples I was talking about before, like you come in and then we acquire something else, and there's all these moving parts, right? So I think it's a prime candidate for agile thinking, right? It's really hard to just set in stone. And so I'm trying to think of an example I can give you that doesn't divulge something internal, but like lots of examples of us saying, hey, this is what we think is going to happen. And then as we said about the integration together, we would learn something. For example, like there were some system things like, hey, we want to move off our Salesforce version onto the company Salesforce, but the company Salesforce was going through a project that ended up shifting out a couple of quarters. And so, just that agile mentality for that was perfect, because that would have really tripped up everything we were doing. Because we were agile and we think that way, we just took it in stride. We're like, okay, well, we're going to work out another way around this, and then it'll all come together. And I think that mindset and that way of planning gives you enough flexibility to where those don't become like showstoppers that frustrate the team because they can't get anything done. You just go into it expecting that level of uncertainty and change, and you're basically built for change at that point. And so when change happens, you're not flummoxed by it. So it was that, the 2-week cadence of delivery, the quarterly level of planning, the being clear that we're not trying to set in stone, all of our plans, and kind of having that variability as you go out. All those ways of thinking that we brought helped us integrate, I would say, just from a process perspective.
Christina, I'm curious on your thoughts, because the way I hear from Steve, a lot of it comes back to mindset at the end of the day, and less so much of an emphasis on tactical techniques.
Yeah, that's right. Whatever tool you have, if you don't have willing participants and people that are open to that type of working model, it's not going to work. Other acquisitions that I've been a part of where they're not used to open feedback, open discuss and debate, sharing of ideas and status and things, really fluidly, where it's kind of seen as like additional overhead. Why do we need to do that? They don't see the value in really trying to bring kind of openness and alignment amongst teams. I've seen those acquisitions not go as well on the integration side, so considering the other parts of the deal. But I think when you have people that understand that, getting everybody on this, that even a simple thing like providing status or sharing your roadmaps or sharing, latest customer support kind of incidents that you've had, sharing that across the teams and cross-functionally, we have been able to, I think, get everyone to elevate their thinking about what they understand about Jira Line and other acquisitions. And that has helped us build more that agile and open and transparent mindset of like, you need to not just care about your function, but you also need to understand what you affect around your world and how other, kind of teams and inputs in part of the world are affecting you. And I think that's part of what Steve is also seeing the benefit of that partnering and people being able to, I think, just kind of be stronger leaders by being more informed and having that holistic view. So I think the mindset is one, but also just driving home the value that, even individuals in the integration team can provide by opening up their mindset to that and seeing the importance of it.
Can you walk me through game plan and plays and how that works in context of M&A?
Well, we haven't fully built them all yet. I'd say one that helped Jira Line, one that I think we have pretty well set now that we have gone through with Jira Line is just standing up, our whole go-to-market process. Like understanding. So if our game plan is, hey, we need to pull a game plan together because we're acquiring a company and they're kind of a sales-led company who's largely targeted towards enterprise customers, we can pull off the shelf these individual plays that now we've created with Jira Line, which is, and I'm going back to like last quarter, right after the deal last year where Steve and his team's hair was on fire trying to close deals because it was our, kind of end of fiscal year. And at the same time, we were going through our large, customer conference. And so we created a series of things that, kind of set teams in motion for standing up a deal desk, making sure we got accounting lined up with sales operations, lined up with legal, making sure we're ready to take orders, start pumping them into, kind of our back office. And then at the same time, the team that is focused on sales, in that new fiscal quarter going forward, they're already starting to build the enablement plans, aligning on the customer, target customer accounts list, starting to work with the channel of what partners we could have to start working with to get them trained on Jira Line. So like all of that was happening in motion, but those are things that we kind of created as individual plays and strung them together because of the situation that Jira Line was in and the specific goals we had for the integration.
I mean, I like the way you explain it because it's getting away from long checklists and more into here's actual techniques to handle these situations in M&A, which
Yeah, we do a lot more now. It's kind of like a library we're building of individual techniques and tactics.
and by the way, for the record, if anybody's looked at my book, I stole a lot of these ideas from Christina, and she's kind of coached me into the reason why we made into a framework that way. What are some of the other plays that you found useful?
I mean, I think the leadership kickoff play that we also developed with Jira, which was, as much, it's not always possible with a given deal, but where we have some buffer between, where we sign, sign and close. We had a couple weeks there where we could actually bring the leadership teams together and bring more people into the tent than what we had. So I think it was only maybe Steve and 2 or 3 people while we were going through diligence that were involved on his side. But as soon as we signed, we could bring in the rest of his leadership team and they could start to meet with their counterparts. That is a play that we've now just kind of codified as like a best practice. Like where we have that time, we should really start to build those relationships early, because that just pays dividends, down the road, and that feeling of like trust and like relationship building.
How have you seen these plays improve integration?
I think there's still some plays that the plays have improved in that we're getting faster. We are building more trust. I think we're helping to, even identify areas within Atlassian where we were probably weaker or not as mature from like an operations standpoint. So I think Jira exposed a lot of the areas where we were kind of getting by because we were serving a different part of the business, but based on their deal cycle, the types of enterprise customers they served, it really helped us to open up to a lot of different areas that we had not looked at before. So the plays have been a good way for integration to identify other parts of the company that we can help improve. And then that feeds into those teams' roadmaps and then future kind of plans for enhancements and evolution.
What were people's reactions when new plays were introduced? Was there resistance? And if there was, how do you handle it?
We're not really as formal on that process. Like I think we just, it's just fluid. It just happens. I don't think we haven't really had like a very regimented kind of structure around plays, but people know now that, hey, for my team, we need to get ready because acquisitions are a key growth strategy of Atlassian. And so they know that there needs to be investment. They've seen the benefits that having these things predefined can help accelerate in terms of like the team success and kind of smooth out some parts of the integration. And that it also serves as a good way for them to kind of get these contracts, approved, or working contracts with other teams kind of solidified on, so that when a new acquisition comes in, and of course it's a surprise and it's coming in the middle of fiscal year, so people aren't planning around it, it's less of a oh my God, let's get ready, let's figure out how to solve this, of more like, hey, we got this, we got to play around this, we know what we need to do, so let's just much more calmly than before figure out just how to get it done.
So this next question would be good to hear from both of you. What's something you didn't know about integration or underestimated going into the acquisition you wish you had been more aware of?
I'm gonna let Steve go first on that one.
Something I didn't know about integration.
Or underestimated, or didn't go as well.
Oh, yeah, underestimated is probably easier than didn't know. Yeah, I tend to be a pretty optimistic, let's go take the hill, we got this kind of person. So, I think we probably underestimated a bit how challenging it would be to come into a flywheel type business with an enterprise piece of software and do business, right? So I think coming in, I thought business model wise, I thought we would be able to make the changes we needed to make to go faster than we were going. And honestly, probably for the first 6 months, it was harder to do business than it was before, pretty dramatically harder, honestly. because there's just a lot of details, just compliance and legal and security. There's a lot of things that were just different, and I definitely underestimated it. I knew it'd be a process. I wasn't completely naive, but it was a bigger process than I thought. And kind of to what Christina's been alluding to, hopefully, most people at Atlassian would agree that because of where, us coming in, that our whole company is stronger in some ways. Like, we've got more tools in our arsenal of how we go to market, right? So we've got the power of our flywheel, which will always be kind of the center of gravity for us. But we also have some of those bigger enterprise motions that help us get adoption faster up at the executive levels of a company. And so, but it was a process. So I did underestimate that. It was a good learning experience going forward. But yeah, I mean, we've sometimes we laugh, like, did we change Atlassian or did Atlassian change us more, right? And I think it's a combo. And the good news, and it's probably a sign of a good acquisition, I think most of those changes on both sides are healthy changes. So that's probably the biggest one that comes to mind for me.
Yeah,
now you're up, Christina.
One that we're still wrestling with a little bit, I think, is on the broader strategy alignment across the company. I think we talked about before how being an agile company, it sets in motion different teams to go, chase after and accomplish the goals and what's right for their customer set. And I think because we've been so acquisitive, and we're always changing conditions, right? Of like what our solution strategy is, product strategy, looking at, competitors and conditions in the market. We're always iterating on that. And so for a high growth company and product like Jira Line to come in and try to rationalize, hey, are you building that or are we building that? Hey, there's a little bit of overlap here, everything from how the products are named to the different feature sets, to like their data model, to, all of those things. It was, I think I didn't fully appreciate how challenging that would be in the midst of integration while the other teams are still running 100 miles an hour. So I think that's something that we will probably build more plays around and a new set of game plans around. So that's one.
Great. Now I'm going to mash this question up together because I think it's an important one, but I want to make sure we can cover it pretty well. So if someone was interested in transforming from a traditional approach to agile, what would the overall integration process look like from a high level? And if you can walk me through where you would actually start the integration process and those steps.
That's a mouthful.
You have a full hour to respond, by the way.
I'd say integration starts even during diligence. I mean, I think a lot of people have in the conference have pointed to kind of the integration team being brought earlier and earlier into the process. And I think for us, that was something that was a huge benefit as well, of like Steve and I getting introduced even while we were doing diligence and kind of explaining my role, explaining kind of at a high level what the integration strategy we think is going to be. And so I guess how I would
like how would you set it like an agile tone, like to really sort of distinguish the difference. Maybe looking back, like to really distinguish it as more of an agile approach or process. If you're looking back at some of your previous roles with some of your colleagues that still follow more of a traditional plan-driven approach, because I think you're right, it needs to come in early. But I guess for companies that want to take away in terms of, hey, we've been doing this the same old way. When people talk about agile, there's sort of vague definitions around it. But how would you define that for a company that's looking?
I might open that up to Steve, since you're, the serial acquirer here. How have you compared and contrast like how traditional integrations have been? Have you seen that as maybe less agile versus this? I think.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it's it's more nuanced, and I know that may be frustrating, but like the mindset is a lot of it, right? So I was thinking of examples of some of the things like in prior acquisitions, there were like, here's a list of things we're going to do during diligence, and being on both sides of the table, right? Here's things we're going to do once we make a decision that we want to move forward from diligence into like a serious relationship. Here's things we're going to do post. Kind of in an agile, with the agile mindset, we were fluid. So like we were like, before we had the deal done, we were doing like deep work on branding and what do we name this and how should it work and exchanging ideas. And so like it was less, some things were less structured, and it was more about like we were just intent on like moving the thing forward. So one of the cool things about that is it built momentum. Like I was getting to work with marketing and product leaders and people through the organization, like what are, you know, even things like branding's tough, right? So like what are we going to call this? How does it fit into the product portfolio? We were moving forward in an agile way. It felt like we were already together, even though there was no ink anywhere that said we were together. And so to me, those are mindset things. Like it's that agile approach to problem solving where we just jump in and start solving and learning. So it's hard to distill it to like a set of practices. It really is a mindset. And then once the mindset's there, the tools and practices are like the enablers of the mindset. But it really is that approach. So with the acquirer being an agile mindset and the acquiree having an agile mindset, things just got done faster. Like we actually spend less time on thinking through the process and more about, you know, let's just be very results driven. Let's just focus on the result, jump in and figure out how to solve things. And so it's a more fluid way of working. Sometimes it feels a little more chaotic or overwhelming with the amount of knowledge flow, but stuff happens way faster. So for me, one of the things I like about that approach to M&A from an agile perspective is it just builds that momentum, because it feels like you're already rowing together, even though you might not end up permanently being rowing together. So it's a great test. Like we're already starting to dig into some of these problems, and we're not even one company yet. So
It almost sounds like
that's
the
my
first
thought
step
on it, Chris.
It's almost like the first company's the initial step is just getting comfortable with that level of transparency, because it seems like you need quite a bit of it to do that.
I think the transparency, and then also just having those clear goals like up front. I think if we were to think about it, Steve, like we're taking a release, as an agile team, we're taking the release and trying to break that down into smaller increments and units of work, right? I think we eventually broke it down to what's the first thing we need to go tackle. The first one I think was like launching at Summit. Like how are we going to launch the brand and have this giant coming out and announcement party together? So we had took the top level kind of deal goals and broke that down into the major releases, right? Thinking like agile terminology, major releases, and then kind of broke that down into work. And the cross-functional teams together, that's another kind of agile approach, is like we don't work in silos of like just the support team, just the marketing team. Like we are all in cross-functional kind of groups together, and we're meeting daily, we're meeting weekly, and just starting to break down that work. So what Steve sees and the team sees is a finished product, not individual functions kind of with their different tasks and deliverables done. And then he's got to figure out how that all adds, value to the business, right? So we're very like goal-based, very cross-functional team-based, and then taking those top-level goals and just like breaking it down to as small of kind of shippable increments as possible.
That's great advice. I know we're about to hit that hour. Last question. What's the craziest thing you've seen in M&A?
I don't know if I can talk about that yet.
Just don't name names and dates. That's what I learned.
Oh, still too incriminating. Steve, do you have a good one?
Yeah, I've only been a part of 4 acquisitions, so I feel like I'd get nailed if I tell any stories. I've seen some stuff.
Maybe over happy hour drinks, Kison.
I'm going to expect you to be there. All right, this will be continued for happy hour, and which will be completely off record. So those of you watching off a live stream, we're not recording the last couple of sessions, completely off record with Chatham House rules. I want to thank you both. I could go on for another hour, which I know Christina, we already worked on one interview for the podcast, so we'll have to finish that up, and then who knows, maybe I'll drag Steve into it too.
Thank you so much for having us. It's been super fun.
Thank you both. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know you guys are busy and you got a lot of deals going on. So thank you so much. And everybody, please give them a big round of applause. Awesome. All right. Well, let's get our next session on deck. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. Hey, what's up, Keith? You ready to go?
I am ready, man. How are you?
I'm hanging out. I've been having fun.
Good.
Oh, the rest of the crew here, Sallie.
Hey there, how's it going?
Doing good. Kicking off a
Good.
little behind the curtains conversation. Are you guys all ready to go?
Clint,
We
your
were
background
instructed to
is
get here early.
Oh, do I still have my happy hour background on?
Yes, it's
Awesome.
hysterical because it looks like a hat.
Yeah. Well, here we'll let you look at my terrible art instead. And I'm looking at that picture of me, realizing that I must not have updated my LinkedIn profile since I ran out of the beard dye. So that
Oh,
and
wow.
the pandemic haircut. Yeah, no comments.
Would you enjoy happy hour? You were a lot of fun in happy hour. I'm glad you joined.
Oh, it was a great session. That was really cool.
Today, I think we're going to step it up a notch. We got more people involved, and yeah.
Well, as the resident Scotty here, I would argue for more booze being the solution to a more fun happy hour.
We'll get an
Hey,
argument.
I'm a Scotty too. Scotty
there you
Nation
go.
represents right here.
I'm trying to encourage it for those watching who didn't have to spend money on flights, travel accommodation. Please utilize those funds to your happy hour beverages. All of it. Get that 30-year-old scotch or bourbon you've always wanted, and
Yeah.
Dom Perignon. All right, the boss is coming. I got to hide. I'll see you guys in a bit.
Thanks.
Okay. How's everybody doing?
Good, how are you?
Good. Very good. Still living the dream.
That's right.
Well, I'm jealous of your offices now that I'm seeing everybody's spaces. I'm going to have to upgrade here.
Mine is awfully dark, Clint.
Yeah. I stole the lamp, and I see it in my glasses lens, but I stole this full spectrum light out of my daughter's room because otherwise I've got this really nice chandelier in this office, but it throws these shadows that make me look like a zebra. So I think we're all getting used to the video conferencing.
Yes, we are.
I don't know if you guys saw that, but one of my cats just completely leaped in the air behind me. So we may have a little acrobatics show.
Nice. And now for the animal portion of the day.
Right.
All right, well, I think we can go ahead and get started. Thank you guys for joining us and welcome everybody to our next session, Tone at the Top, Intersection of Leadership and Culture in M&A. Our speakers for this session include Dr. Clint Kendrick, Director of Strategic Talent Initiatives at SC Johnson, Sallie Cunningham, HR Executive and Integration at Cytiva, Dr. Keith Dunbar, Managing Partner at JKD Talent Solutions, and Keith Crosby, Global Leader, Acquisitions and Outsourcing Leadership and Change at IBM. Thank you guys so much again for being here, and take it away.
Great. Thanks so much, Marcia. We're really glad to be here. For those of you that are on the line, you'll notice that we have a Keith Crosby and a Keith Dunbar. So I will do my best to keep folks in order here, and it may become J. Keith and Keith. So we'll sort that out as we go through. But we're here today to talk about the intersection of culture and leadership in M&A. And rather than do a long intro, I think I'll just go ahead and kick off with the questions. And just to get us started, I'd like to have each of our panelists talk a bit about their experience in M&A. And why don't we start with you, Sallie?
Sure. Thanks, Clint. So yes, I'm Sallie Cunningham. I'm HR executive and the HR integration leader for Cytiva, which is formerly the GE Healthcare Life Sciences business. We were actually just acquired on April 1 by the Danaher Corporation, and we are an independent operating company under their life business. And so we are about 7,000 people in 40 countries. We closed right in the middle of COVID and are running a very interesting integration right now. So I'm excited to be here and talk to you all a little bit about that.
Great. Thanks, Sallie. J. Keith, how about you?
Hey, thanks. Great to be here, everyone. So, J. Keith, my experience is probably north of about 30 deals, but Most of that has come since 2014 when I got my doctorate at Penn, focused on the leadership factor in M&As and consulting with companies to help them understand where they have leadership strengths and leadership risk areas they need to address.
Great, thanks. And Keith.
Thanks, Clint. Hi, everyone. I'm Keith Crosby, and I lead a small practice of org change consultants at IBM. We're a dedicated team to the M&A space for IBM for all internal deals. We work not only in M&A, but also divestitures. We also do some hybrid type deals. We are, like I said, we're not HR folks, but we are org change people. We use a we're a very acquisitive company, so we have a lot of activity going on at any point in time. And we've got a global team, and I've been doing this for about 12 years now. I have been in consulting for about 28 years, but don't use that number, please. Thank you.
Thanks, Keith. And I'll go ahead and just share a little bit about my background as well. Even though I'm facilitating the discussion, I may throw in an insight or two that maybe isn't covered by one of our other panelists. So I'm Clint Kendrick. As of Monday, I'm the Director of HR Strategic Talent Initiatives at SC Johnson, where I own our HR M&A practice, as well as talent analytics. Prior to that, I've done about 70 deals with both Oracle and Boeing, as well as a small Chinese company I worked for briefly. So really excited to be here. So we'll just go ahead and jump into the questions. So a McKinsey study showed an almost even split between innate cultural differences and poor leadership when looking at the reasons so many deals fail to meet their investment thesis. Why do you think culture and leadership are so critical to a deal's financial success? And Keith, we'll go ahead and start with you.
Sure. So as you're well aware, we could have an entire conference just on trying to define what culture is. But for this conversation, we're going to say that culture is really the way things get done. Okay, so I'll take these two one at a time and talking about culture. The reason it's important to understand the culture in M&A is because in an acquisition, for example, you have an acquiring company that has a specific type of culture that they live and breathe in, and you have another company which they're trying to acquire, which may have something that is not exactly the same. It's important to understand those two differences. So, for example, you want to understand how we do rewarding for the two companies. And the acquiring organization, they may have a very process-driven, very approval-driven way of working. And the acquired company may have a very innovative, agile way of working, spinning up teams, at any point in time, and having just a different way of working altogether. Also, we can look at the way we do the actual work itself. The acquired company may be focused on deadlines and quality, and the acquired company may be focused on the customer experience. So the reason it's important to understand these two things is because when you throw them together and try to make sure that the company can deliver together against the business case, without knowing those nuances and differences between the culture and the leadership, you're going to have problems. The same thing with leaders. So in some companies like the acquired leader, they may have an organization of leaders that are acquiring this company that are very hierarchical, very top-down leadership, command and control. And it may be a very flat organization that they're acquiring, where the leaders do a lot of consensus building and that sort of leadership style, and encouraging risks and failing forward fast. And just think about those two things with the culture and the leadership coming together. If you don't know that and don't know where those problems are, you won't know how to build a plan to address them. And the plan can be anything from how to adopt something that both one of them has, how to decide on doing something new culture-wise, or how to understand that the new leaders that you're acquiring may need some more enablement. And all of those things pulled together, unless you build a plan out to address those things, you can have a very negative impact on your business case and the ability to deliver against the goals you're trying to achieve.
Great, thanks, Keith. Sallie, what would you like to add to that?
I think that Keith did a great job of identifying the landscape that you may be dealing with as you work on a deal and you are thinking about culture and engagement and leadership. And for me, I have a very real life example. I came from GE, where I, for the last 14 years, I've been working on deals in that business, and I've been a deal lead, and I'm usually in the position of being the acquirer and not the acquired. And so here I am, day 72 after being acquired. And my real life example is just what we're going through as a business coming into the Danaher Corporation. And the thing that really has struck me on this particular transaction is that we're really lucky that coming in, we have a certain level of independence as an operating company to kind of set our own course. And I've seen that my experience right now is I've never seen a workforce that's been more engaged. And I think there are a number of factors really influencing that. There's a lot that our business is doing in the fight against COVID and helping find or support an ultimate vaccine for COVID-19. And so there's some things like that that are really driving engagement in the business. But even before, when we were preparing for close, we did so much to figure out change leader. How are we going to pulse employees and understand what's going on in, on their minds and in their hearts as they go through this transition. And we've taken some very proactive measures to help manage the change process and how much is hitting the organization at once. And, it's been remarkable. The organization is running on, all cylinders right now. And I think it's really because we took it seriously from the very beginning, and our CEO supports it. And our CEO has put the right people in place to help manage the change. And he listens. If he sees that something is kind of rolling off course, he steps in to help correct it. And I think that's been very important, because we know that an engaged workforce is a productive workforce, and a productive workforce drives revenue. And isn't that what everyone wants at the end of the day?
Great. Thanks, Sallie. Jay Keith, anything that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I totally agree with what both Keith and Sallie had to share about the topic. I think from my perspective, these two areas, culture and leadership, are critically linked with one another, right? And I think that's what Keith and Sallie were pointing out. For me, there's a lot of focus on culture, obviously, and why it's important to deal success. And in that case, if you think about leaders influencing their followers and followers influencing their leaders and the situations that they work in, that's really that culture box that we talk about, why it's so important to understand that. The thing that feeds that, though, is really that leadership skill and trait piece. So whether a leader is skilled or unskilled in a particular area, it will manifest itself as poor leadership across a number of different areas. And so I think that's why you really got to pay a lot of attention to both of these together. So it's not an either or, and that's something that we brought out in most recent report that we wrote for the conference board called the M&A Leadership Playbook, that you got to do these things together, not one or the other.
Great, thank you all. So culture and leadership have been identified as significant M&A issues for literally years. I remember browsing some books that were written in the 80s that pointed to research done in the 60s about culture and leadership in M&A. But Baker McKenzie shows that about 70% of serial acquirers don't think they do a good job assessing leaders and culture. When do you think companies should start looking at culture and leadership issues in a deal, and why? And Jay Keith, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, thanks, Clint. So I think fundamentally that when you look at the deal process cycle, for the conference board, we looked at 5 stages of the deal process cycle, and the optimum point to start looking at the leadership piece is, as soon as you identify a potential target, because the deal thesis, rationale, and the deal objectives are going to drive what you need leaders to be able to do in both the companies to successfully execute on those. And so as the acquirer, you're in a much better position to start understanding where you have leadership strengths at the individual and the collective level, is whereas with the organization that you're acquiring, trying to find out some initial ideas of where they stand on that through looking at social media posts and other things that are available to you. Obviously for the acquired company, it's much more difficult to get access to them at the right point. You then have the issues of, even if you're coming in to do leadership assessment work to help the deal be successful, you have these biases that the data is going to be used to make decisions about who stays or who goes. You have other biases from the acquiring company perspective, where they don't believe that they should be assessed because they're the winning company in this deal arrangement. And so you got those dynamics working against you the whole time. And so it's really a matter of how do you convince organizations that looking at this at some stage in the process is vitally important to them to having a successful deal. I can tell you that when we did the leadership factor and M&A research for the conference board, we asked people these questions about why do you do any type of leadership assessment in your deals? And it kind of mirrors what you saw here in the data from Baker McKenzie. Most of them in the interviews understood that leadership was important, but they didn't know what to do about it. And so they defaulted to doing nothing about it. So.
Great, thanks, Keith. And Keith.
Yeah, so I mean, I totally agree with Jay Keith. I mean, that's our philosophy together with you on that. Interestingly, we look at it very early on, when we get access to the fact that we're targeting a specific organization and start doing our homework, doing our intelligence, the available information online. We're looking at things like, what is their corporate stewardship all about? What are their values? What is the stuff that we're hearing on these public forums about the way they run the company, the employee satisfaction, those types of things. The same thing for the leaders. We're looking at what their backgrounds are, what kind of publications have they had? Have they done TED Talks? And also really important for us is to look at the relationship map for the leadership team that is in the acquired company, because you want to understand if they've worked together 2 or 3 times before, if they went to school together, those types of things, because for us, that helps us to build a hypothesis in our minds of, this is a group that's either been together a long time or not been together for a long time. But what it does for us is it allows us to create a hypothesis for what we think the culture is and how we think that leadership team works together. And then when we go into the actual due diligence, we have a hypothesis that we can either, get affirmed, or we can probe in deeper to get some new information, and always keeping the lens on that, to Jay Keith's point, these guys are probably trying to sell their company. So we have to be thinking about the answers we're getting, but it also allows us to take our original hypothesis, refine that a little bit more, and then think that's maybe a little bit different about us is we continue to focus on leadership and culture throughout the life cycle. So once we've closed the deal, we want to get that same type of information from middle management, from the managers, the line managers, and from the employees. Once we've done that in, say, the first quarter after close, we've got a pretty comprehensive picture of what it really is like inside that organization. And then that gives us an idea of how we need to address leadership to help them be more able to deliver, and how we need to bring the cultures together to make sure that we don't miss anything and have organizational risks that can impact our business case.
So Keith, when you start doing your work, are you doing that after LOI, pre-LOI?
It's after LOI.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Sure.
Sallie, how about you?
Yeah, I'll just quickly kind of wrap this up. It's funny because Keith Crosby and I have kind of very similar experiences in this particular area. And I took a few notes ahead of this session around how I might answer this question. And Keith just said it so eloquently. What I'll do is I'll give you an example, because we did a lot of the same things. I had a checklist at GE that I would follow. And if we were looking at a target, the earlier I could get in, the better. The earlier that I knew, the better, because there's a lot of information you can gather online, LinkedIn and in different places. You can find a lot of information on the executive team, where they graduated from, where they've worked together before. But I very distinctly remember one time we were pre-LOI, and we were one of a few different businesses that were looking at a particular target, and we flew to a city, and we're in the hotel conference room, and they're giving us their spiel. And there were 3 executives for this business who had worked together at 2 previous companies, and they were private equity folks who, they just kind of went from one deal to the next together. And they had a wonderful rapport, but we knew that they had no interest in coming with this deal because they were going to go on to their next thing. And they kind of threw in this woman who was the quality leader for the business and put her on the panel, and they completely ignored her during the presentation. It was just painfully obvious that, they were running their show, and she was, here's somebody in the business, and, here's our female executive, and they didn't even bring her into the conversation. So that was a pretty obvious one where I thought, we're going to have some real challenges to overcome here. And, after we went through the process, it wasn't, the target just didn't end up being a good match for us. So we didn't end up going any further in this particular deal. But, and I was glad that we didn't, because I knew that it was going to come with a real set of challenges.
Yeah. One thing I didn't hear any of you saying is, please don't let us know about the deal until you're ready to announce. I hear a lot of HR folks and other functions that don't get disclosed until it's time to announce the deal. And nobody here said that that's a best practice. I'm glad that hopefully we get in a little earlier so that we can create interventions earlier on. Keith, I think you had something else to add.
Just a quick comment, and I was talking about how we continue to look at the leadership and the culture throughout the life cycle. One of the first things that we do to make that happen right after close is we have a leader alignment session where we look at everything from operating model to culture to who's going to lead the business, to who's going to support the business. And so that helps drive the next year, 2 years, 5 years of how this thing moves out into a successful closure. But I think that's a critical thing that we all look at. I mean, Sallie and I have talked about this many times, doing a leader alignment session after close to get everybody on the same page from both organizations, so you have a pretty good landscape of what's coming up.
Keith, you answered actually a question that came in the chat while this was being answered. So I'll throw it out to Sallie and Jay Keith as well. And that question is, a lot of times members of the senior management team are misaligned or have different interpretations of why the deal's being done. What tactical interventions do you recommend to achieve the alignment and ensure that there's that strong tone at the top? So Keith, you just talked about a leadership alignment session. Sallie, Jay Keith, anything that you would add to that?
Yeah, so I mean,
we've done this. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead, Sallie.
We've done in a number of the same things where having that leadership alignment session, that communication is so important. And at the certainly at the very top levels of the organization, we would absolutely expect that. There's going to be some lag between the top level of your organization and as you fall deeper into the organization, but at that top level, it should be very clear. But I think if we're seeing those types of issues where there's a misalignment, a lot of times it's on the buyer, and it's because they haven't really thought through. They've been so excited about this shiny object coming in, they haven't thought through what exactly they're going to do with the business once it's on board, or once the deal closes, and so. Aligning that very quickly internally as the buyer will certainly help facilitate the right conversations on the other end.
Yeah, I think I've seen the same thing in deals that I've worked on where there's a lack of direction, alignment, and commitment, right? So they don't know what the new direction is for the company, how they fit into it as the acquired company. Without that, they can't align their work across different parts of the organization effectively and efficiently. And then bottom line is, the most important piece is commitment to this co-created future. And so that was one of the M&A leadership practices we talked about in the most recent article from the conference board that I mentioned.
Great. And the one thing I would add is never underestimate the power of an effective integration leader. It can be really, really important to have that person be the glue that helps hold everything together, including helping ensure that there is strategic alignment. So when I look at members of the HR M&A Roundtable, which I chair and many of us are part of, I see companies handling their culture and leadership diligence a number of different ways, including dedicated M&A teams, people working on special assignments, or using outside consultants, among others. What do you think some of the pros and cons of these approaches to culture and leadership diligence are? And Keith, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So I guess I would say for us, part of the strategy that we have for our growth strategy is a lot of inorganic growth. So we expect a lot of M&A activity every year for our annual growth strategy. And as a part of that, that means many acquisitions. And we found that for us, what works is to default to having dedicated teams. So for instance, my team is a dedicated team of OCM consultants. We work on every acquisition that we have. We have a seat at the table from the beginning and all the way till we close the deal out. And we do quarterly reviews where we participate in that. And for us, that's important because my team and I understand how the business works inside of IBM. We understand all of the business units and the lines of business. We work directly with the GMs and their senior leadership team. And we're a consistent face on all these acquisitions, right? So they're used to seeing us. They know what we're there for. They know the value that we bring. And we've built those strong relationships over years and years. And so that helps us to, sometimes when we have to challenge them around things, around what's causing their attrition that they don't want to hear, we've got data to back it up. Another thing is that we have because we've done this for quite a while, and we do a lot of data collection on every acquisition that we have through survey results, through meeting with focus groups, one-on-one roundtables and things like that. We have tons of data that we've collected over the years, and we have the ability internally to take that data and look at trends on certain types of acquisitions or certain types of leadership styles or certain types of organizational risks. And that affords us the ability to have predictive analytics. So we can look at an acquisition coming in very early, compare it to something that looked like this 2 or 3 years ago or last month, and say, based on what we see here, here are some things that we really need to look out for in the culture side and the leadership side. And so for us, it's effective for that reason. That's the big pro for it. However, we do supplement teams sometimes when we are in a unique situation with, say, organized labor in different countries. So we may bring in, our employee relations or labor relations. And a few years ago, we were building a brand new line of business, and it was going to be built completely off of acquisitions. And so we brought in an external consultant to talk with us about what's the org design model look like? How does it integrate with all the business units and that sort of thing? So while we're not just, married to only doing dedicated teams, we do use supplemental teams, consultants, and that kind of thing. Most of the folks are not, we don't have any part-time folks on the teams across the whole structure. Most of us are dedicated, and it's been a fact that worked for us.
Great. Thanks, Keith. Sallie.
I think for me, however you do it depends on the type of resourcing that you have. And as long as you're doing it in a thoughtful way that works for your business, you'll get it done. But to Keith's point, when you have a situation where you have a large, sophisticated team that repeats deals all the time, you're going to get a better output from that. And so anything that you can do, and I can tell you, from my experience at GE, when we were really doing a lot of deals and doing multiple deals in a year, and within a particular business unit. So I did a lot of deals back to back for a number of years in our healthcare business, for example. And so we started to build a bench, and we knew that I would be in more of the consultation type role and managing the project plan and advising and counseling the specific business that was doing the acquisition. And so we tried to build this pipeline of HR folks within the function to build up an M&A skill set. And we had a training course that people could go through, and a number of materials available for people. Nothing really replaces working on a real deal, but having some idea of how to see around certain corners that might come up is certainly helpful. And I think that leveraging consultants, we've done that off and on throughout the years as well. And there are great times to leverage a consultant to come in and help facilitate a very specific thing, get you through a difficult piece of your acquisition, especially where you don't have a skill set that exists. But I would advise you to then, learn how to do that so that you can keep it in-house next time, because internally you know your organization better than anyone else, and that's really where you want that knowledge to be.
Thanks, Sallie. Jay Keith.
Yeah, I think I would echo what Sallie said. So coming at it from the outside consultant perspective, the pro that organizations like myself bring as we become more highly specialized in the consulting world is specific specialized capability solutions that organizations can use to be more successful and, again, achieving their deal value through their deal objectives, right? And the con, as Sallie references, I should never go into a consulting relationship where I'm not imparting my knowledge to that client. So as she says, they can do this themselves at some point in the future, right? Because, you know, there are some consultants out there, right, that don't take that approach. It's, you know, don't teach people how to fish, but teach them, here's the hook, I'll teach you how to fish the next time. So
yeah. Great. And I will caveat this by saying that, you know, we all tend to work with larger serial acquirers. So your mileage may certainly vary if you're part of a smaller organization. And just a shameless plug, I've written the HR Practitioner's Guide to Mergers and Acquisitions Due Diligence, which is out on Amazon. So for folks that are that smaller group that are looking at a way to think about their due diligence, I'd offer that as a resource as well.
that was a good plug, Clint.
Thank you. I tried to sneak that in there.
Well done.
So a question that we seem to hear a lot when we talk about leadership is retention. Retention of key leaders is an important part of many LOIs, can definitely be a negotiating point if leadership offers or closing conditions, or retention is part of delayed deal consideration arrangements like earnouts or holdbacks. Retention is also a fundamental assumption for business continuity and synergy realization on a number of deals. So I'd love to hear some of your thoughts on who should be considered for retention, how long retention periods should be, and what retention mechanisms might be used. I know this is a really big question, so we'll give it a few moments. And if folks have questions in the Q&A, we'll try to manage those as well. Sallie, why don't we start with you? Thoughts on retention?
Sure. Well, this is one of my favorite topics, and sometimes good, sometimes bad. I used to say that retention was going to eventually be the death of me. So I think the number one thing that you can do is give people a compelling reason to come to work every day. And we kid ourselves all the time thinking that money is going to solve problems. When I'm working with our leadership teams on retention, I'm certainly considering the top leaders in the organization and, you know, kind of where they are and so forth. But I'm really working very, very hard, especially during due diligence and before we go public with a deal, to have access wherever I can to key people below the top leadership team. And we've had a number of targets over the years that have allowed that, which has been extremely helpful. So, you know, your software architects, your senior scientists, that, you know, really the brain trust of the organization, trying to engage them as early as possible, ensuring that things like their compensation is competitive, helping them build a network, giving them a sense of a promising future, because that's the stuff that people want. I mean, that's why I go to work every day. It's not because someone's giving me a bonus. That's the icing on the cake, and I would never turn down a bonus if someone wants to give me one. But you know, I want to have a compelling reason to come to work and do interesting things with interesting people. The other thing that I do is I engage the HR leader at the target as early as possible. I engage the HR leader in my current business that's taking on the acquisition so that they can start coming in and helping assess talent. That's our wheelhouse. We love to do that stuff. And so, you know, bring your HR leads in as quickly as possible. I think that there is a time and place for cash incentives of, you know, various types where they can be leveraged, but they are not going to be your ultimate drivers of engagement. You know, and I've seen a lot of situations where, you know, a business that's doing an acquisition will, you know, I've got on my checklist, I have to do something with retention. They throw a couple things out there and they think they're done. And what they forget is that, you know, this is a courtship, and it's, you know, when you sign those agreements, this is when you need to really start engaging your key talent for the long term, because that money is only going to hold them over for so long, and that's when, you know, you want to work on, like, well, what development opportunities are there? What's next? What are the deal value drivers? What do I get to work on? How do I get to be part of whatever this great future is going to be? And I also do another thing where a lot of times we'll say, and I think this is starting to be a little old school for a lot of folks now. We used to say that, the cash incentives related to retention were very much time-based. And I've never done that. If we're giving someone a cash incentive, it's tied to a specific goal. It's tied to a deal value driver or something that the business is expected to deliver post-close, whether it's the launch of a product, moving into a new market, going live with systems and tools. And not everybody's on the same time frame with their bonuses either. We're not dragging them out any longer than we have to, but they're generally tied to like, okay, if we're going to launch this product in 6 months, then we're going to pay out bonuses in 6 months. So we make them very much time-based, timely, and associated with something very specific that's associated with taking the business forward. And I'll just kind of end with, there's just nothing more poisonous than a visible business leader who doesn't want to be there.
Yeah.
And, I have witnessed that on a number of occasions where, we've had a CEO, CFO, COO who they just didn't want to come into GE, and that's okay. They're a startup person, or they want to retire, or whatever the case may be. And, I had a situation with a CFO once who really just wanted to retire. And, we initially had talked to him about coming in and, here's a retention and here's some long-term incentive and blah, blah, blah. And we could tell that just wasn't where his head was. And once we got through that and we figured out what he really wanted, because we had an open dialogue with him, we made an arrangement with him where pre-close, we made the arrangement that he was going to exit the business 60 days post-close. He had a very specific set of work that he was going to do to transition. We were able to be upfront with that once the closing happened, like, hey, the CFO is going to retire, but we've got this plan in place and we're going to transition this work. And he was able to make the graceful exit that he really wanted to make. And we were able to get what we needed out of him in that period of time post-close. So I'll leave you with that.
Great. Thanks, Sallie. Jay Keith, how about you? Thoughts on retention?
Yeah, so I come at this from the perspective of identifying the right people to retain. And so the leadership, the deal value leadership practice that I mentioned from the report, that is intended to help you identify, based on each specific deal objective, where is the value generated and who is the person responsible or the team responsible for generating that value. And so through that process, we want to identify who is the person and what leadership skills they need in this specific role. And I'll give you an example. So let's assume that the deal objective is to move into China to sell lots more products, right? So our normal thinking might be that the SVP of global sales, in the acquired company is, the critical role in that organization. But in effect, it may actually be that person sitting at the desk that's the account manager in Shanghai. And so we force those kinds of conversations through the workshop by asking the right questions so you can identify who those roles are, so you can make sure you lock those people up and ensure that, again, you attain that deal value.
Great. Thanks, Jay Keith. Keith?
Yeah, so along with Sallie, I mean, we've had this conversation many times, the toxic leader that you acquire, right? And so one of the ways that we try to get around that, or try to at least understand that early on, is during the due diligence process. We interview one-on-one with each of the CEO and his or her direct reports that are disclosed at due diligence. And part of our questioning is around talent. We want them to call names out. Who is the key talent that must be retained to make this be successful? Part of that conversation also is, and tell us about you. What are your goals and your aspirations? And we want full transparency. We know we're not going to get it completely all the time because they may be positioning themselves to sell the company. But what comes out of that is people will open up to you and tell you, I'd like to see this thing get through the 3 months or the 6 months, and I could give you a year. And sometimes they'll say that what they really want to do is just walk away close, so you have to get under that. And sometimes those first interviews that we do give us insights into who's wanting to stay and who doesn't really have an interest in staying. The second thing has to do with what Keith said. In that same interview, we asked them to go deeper into the business and say, who is the key talent? Who are the rock stars? Who are the up and coming people that we really need to keep an eye on? Because we know that once an announcement comes out, the competitors are going to be swarming on them, right? And we want to put our arms around those folks, embrace them and say, you have a home here. What's it going to take to keep you? And so we go deep into the organization. Right after close, we try to figure out from the managers of those people and the upline managers and the middle managers and the people managers, who are the up and coming stars? And to Jay Keith's point, we document that and we figure out and work with those managers to say, who's at risk of leaving? How difficult is it to be replaced? And what would it take to keep them there? And it's not, to Sallie's point, it's not always money. It's an investment, because sometimes it's like, help them get a certification, help them finish their degree, let them go to a conference that they go to every year, stuff like that. So we look at retention, obviously at the close point, kind of at the top of the house. Soon after close, we go as deep as we can to find out where the talent is that's going to deliver that business case and stay with them.
One other thing that I would throw out there that I found fairly successful for addressing both talent retention as well as cultural issues is what I call the post-diligence huddle. So after each group has completed their due diligence report, and regardless of where that goes in your organization, there's a lot of information that's pulled in at that time. And I have found that organizations that pull everybody together after diligence is completed, or the formal diligence is completed, and asks two questions inside. One is, how are we going to break this business when we move them over to our way of doing things, right? So that's a culture question. How are we going to break this business? And then you can mitigate. That addresses culture. And the second one that I really like to have everybody answer is, who are the key people that you saw when you were conducting your diligence? It can be really easy for us on the HR side and even the corp dev folks, because we tend to deal with the top level of the organization, where some of our colleagues that are doing their diligence tend to be a little bit deeper in the organization and can get some different insights. So I would just put in a plug for the post-diligence huddle there. So during this conversation, a few folks mentioned middle managers, or people below the C level. So when you think about the role of a middle manager in terms of both leadership and culture, how do you see that? What should that be? And Jay Keith, I'm going to start with you. I know that you had some thoughts about that ended up in Harvard Business Review. So I think you've got a couple of ideas about this.
Yeah, it's an important topic. So, I've looked at this from my doctoral research, the research with the Conference Board and other organizations' research. And it's clear from what the research tells us, and a lot of this is applied, is that middle managers have an effect on deal success. From my research, I asked this question: do middle managers or senior executives have a greater impact on deal success? And for the acquiring company, it was senior executives. Made perfect sense. They're the ones that are executing the strategy and deciding where the business goes. But for an acquired company, it was middle managers. And if you think about, what Sallie and Keith have been talking about, retaining people at the top, the reality is that, like the CFO Sallie brought up, they're not going to stay, right? Because they have reasons that they want to leave. Maybe there's another company that has piqued their interest that they want to go to. And so, engaging with middle managers as early as possible from a talent identification perspective, like we just talked about with the last question, is really important. The other aspect is also the idea of these being major change management projects in organizations. And so there was some great research out of Stanford. Guy looked at major change projects. What he identified from that is that 68% of those projects failed in the organization. The ones that were successful, it was because middle managers were involved. They were engaged, helping to set the path for what this project transformation was going to be in their organization. And I think a lot of organizations inherently have heard this comment about the frozen middle, right? You got the employees on the bottom itching to change things. Senior executives are looking to change things, but that frozen middle is where the work has to be done. And so that's why, when we go into deals, we're obviously looking at L1, L2, but we try to, point our clients into an area where they're also looking at the middle management and where they are going to have challenges either from a leadership and or the culture perspective in being able to achieve those deal objectives that they've lined up.
Keith, how about you?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with J. Keith more. The middle management for us are the change agents, right? They're the ones that are executing at the employee level. They're the ones that are trying to emulate the behaviors that we want them to do to be successful. We need them to help the employees get engaged, because we know the higher the engagement, the higher the productivity, the higher the revenue, right? But the other side of that is they also need to be the conduit for bringing issues, risks, concerns, morale problems, bringing that back up the chain to the people that can make a difference in solving those problems. So I see that person as critical for, disseminating stuff that's going to help us to be successful at the grassroots level, but also being that voice of the masses going up to senior leadership to make those changes that we need to make. And we see that in just about every deal we have. So part of the role that manager has to play is that we call it North and South communications, providing feedback and delivering messages, and just having that as a constant stream of information going back and forth from the executives all the way down to the employee level.
Great. Thanks, Keith. Sallie?
I'm aligned with the two Keiths on this. The single most important influencer for your employees is their manager. And, as been stated, the middle layer of managers in the organization, they have the bulk of the population reporting to them. They're in the trenches. They know where the pain points are. You have to listen to them and engage them. And I would caution, I see a lot of organizations go to, well, let's go do a survey. Don't do a survey. Talk to them. Get them in a room together. Get them on a Zoom chat, and ask them how they're doing. As an HR practitioner for the last 25 years, I can't even tell you how many times I've been asked to administer a survey, and nothing's been done with it. But what I do instead is I'll just do a focus group. I'll just bring people together, and people will tell you what's on their mind if you ask them. And so for me, the best way to get in touch with that middle layer of management and really understand how they're doing is to get there, right with them. So when I make site visits, I make a very explicit time to sit down with them. Now I'm having to find new ways to do that. And in the deal that I'm currently a part of, we read J. Keith's research and published articles, and we took that to heart, and we know just how important it is to engage this particular population, and we're taking some explicit steps to do so.
Great. If I can just throw in one additional thought on middle manager engagement, it's that it usually starts at announce. So having been an acquired middle manager, there is nothing more frustrating than being pulled into a meeting where you're told you've just been bought and I've got 30 minutes to sort out what's going on with me, right? Do I have a job? Can I feed my kids? Can I pay my mortgage, right? All of this stuff about me that I've got to deal with. And then you've given me 30 minutes and no information, and I've got to go take care of my team. So I really would encourage companies to seriously look at the way middle managers are handled during the announcement process. Maybe give more than 30 minutes of time, give them some tools to cope with their own change process, and then give them some tools so they can go lead their teams through it. It's something I spent quite a bit of time helping us to update at Oracle. And I found that when we did a better job of empowering the middle managers, the integration usually went much, much better. So we have a opportunity for some Q&A, and one of the first questions that we have here is about the stages of grief. So if you think about that Kubler-Ross grief model where you start with denial, move to anger, then bargaining, depression, and finally acceptance. We find that people that are acquired often go through these stages, and the person writing the question pointed that out. So are there any practices that we can engage in for helping the organization to move through those stages in a more reasonable time frame? What kind of tactical steps have you done to help people move denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance? And whichever one of you'd like to take that first, please jump in.
I'll try.
Start.
Go ahead, Sallie.
So I can tell you that the deal that we're working on right now, it's almost like every meeting leading up to close, we through that diagram, up on the screen. And the first thing we did was just acknowledge that it exists. And we've repeated over and over, with our team that's been working on, preparing for the transition and the ultimate integration, that everybody goes through this, and everybody goes through it at their own pace. So, they're not everybody's going to do this on the same day or on the same time frame. And so we have started just by having an open dialogue about it. And I think that has helped a lot, because I witness in conversations that our leadership team has truly acknowledged that and respects that. And it'll come up as they talk about, we're going through this change and everybody's sort of doing it differently. Like, I hear them repeating the words that we shared with them, as we were preparing them to get through to the close. So that's been a really positive way to start this. Now, I think time will tell how we end up on the other side. But so far it's been really good. I think, I've certainly worked on deals where we could have done this much better. And it's really come down to communication and that engagement of the middle layer of management, like we were just talking about.
Yeah, Sallie, I couldn't agree more. That we're on the same page with that one. I think the best thing to do is to give them a voice, give them the opportunity to express their concerns, acknowledge, to Sallie's point and to Jay Keith's point, they're going to go through it at different times, and don't be surprised by it coming back over and over again. So what I mean by that is the first shock when they hear that they're being acquired, they're not going to hear the first things you tell them, because they're going through what Jay Keith was saying. Do I have a job? Can I pay my mortgage? Can I feed my kids? So it's going to take several times of them hearing the same thing to really get their head around what's happening. So they need that voice. I would also say it's critical to enable the managers, as soon as the data is available, to share that with the managers so that they can have the answers. Some of the tactical things that we're starting to do is we use Slack at IBM. And so we set up a Slack channel for the acquired managers and the managers in that business team that acquired them. And it's a series of FAQs. It's a series of a manager saying, hey, I've got an employee that wants to know this. What's the answer, or when will we have the answer? That's been helpful. It's also helpful for us to open up a channel for all employees. It says, ask me anything, and it goes to our PMO office. And so it gives them a way to say, this may have already been asked, but this is a concern of mine. And then you'll see that there's kind of a feeding frenzy. They all start building on top of that. But it does give them a sense that somebody's there to listen and somebody's there to answer their questions. And then the last thing that I would say that we do is right after close, we'll open up office hours. So we'll have a day where there's office hours for HR to be on site at the main location or something like that. So they're on site and you just ask them anything. And those kinds of things work well. But the key here I think for us is that do it as soon as possible, because without information coming down to them, they start getting nervous and rumors start being created, and it's not a good place to try to dig out of.
Yeah. Jay Keith, any thoughts to add?
The only thing that I would add that are pieces from each of you is Maslow's hierarchy of needs kicks in immediately, right? That's what you brought up, Clint. And providing them the right set of tools is critical to helping them get through the stages of grief, I believe. By preparing them, emotional intelligence, maybe emotional intelligence is a part of your organization, reaffirming those kinds of principles, looking at communication, because one of the things we asked in the original study with the conference board was what top 10 leadership skills are most important across each of the 5 deal stages. And there was only one that cut across all 5 deal stages, and it's communicates effectively.
Yeah.
You think about how a message starts at the top and gets its way down to the employees, that gets muddled. And when messages get muddled, you are not accounting for Maslow's hierarchy of needs, as we call it.
Yeah. The only other thing that I would add to that is in our middle manager toolkits that we provide to those managers, I think there's some very practical things we can give them. Either the Kubler-Ross grief model, which is what we just talked about. There's something called the Bridges transition model, which is a super geeky way of saying that when employees change, they experience a bit of a productivity dip until they get used to their new reality. But training managers on what to look for with their employees, because each employee's journey through whichever model you want to use is going to be an individual journey. It's up to that employee to work their way through things. And so equipping managers to know how to work with employees who are at different points of that change journey can be really powerful. I also personally, and maybe this is the recovering West Coaster in me, I like to include our EAP phone number. That's the Employee Assistance Program. Some employees just get really stuck, and the acquisition is just the straw that broke the camel's back. They might be dealing with a significant personal or financial issue, and they just need to talk to somebody who's not their boss and not HR. And so giving them that EAP number so they can go get a couple of counseling sessions to help them work through whatever's going on can be really, really invaluable. So I don't see any other questions in the Q&A, and I know we're at about 7 minutes to the top of the hour. So Jay, Keith, and Sallie, thank you so much. It's been a lot of fun. And I know that we're all open networkers on LinkedIn. So if anybody wants to reach out and ask us questions, please feel free to do that. Marcia, thanks for introducing us. And Kison, thanks for having us.
Hey, appreciate that, Clint. Thank you all for this great session. Keith and Sallie, Clint, thank you so much. Let's all give it up for them. We'll get our next session started in a few moments.
Thanks, everyone.
By the way, we should put a plug in for the HR roundtable. I know there's a lot of practitioners tuned in that are in HR in their company. And I think, are all of you part of it?
Yeah.
So this panel is essentially sponsored by the, you can go ahead, Clint. I could do a better pitch, actually. The HR M&A roundtable, great home for anybody that's an HR practitioner that is involved in M&A, needs to step up their learning curve. Great group of people.
Yeah, well, thanks, Kison. Yeah, and you can find out about us at M&A Roundtable. We do monthly either webinars or roundtable sessions that are truly interactive. We have our annual conference coming up in September, and Sallie and Keith will both be presenting at that, or Sallie and Jay Keith rather. And we've got some great resources that we're rolling out just to help the HR community become better at managing through this, so that we can, take care of the employees, take care of the companies, and just really do M&A better, because it touches so many lives when a company's acquired.
Thanks, Clint. I may be dropping by there.
Well, we'd love to have you, especially since it's all virtual this year. So,
Oh, you guys are going all virtual. Wow.
Yeah.
Well, this would be great. I anything that's led practitioner-driven events it's always fun and highly educational.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
All right, we'll get the next one ready. Awesome. What's up, Toby? I see you geared up, ready to go.
Yeah, you hear me?
Oh yeah, I can hear you.
All right, let me turn the video on.
Oh, you want to do a little behind the curtains conversation here?
Absolutely. How are you going, Kison?
I'm doing pretty good. We got about 5 minutes before we kick off.
Good. First of all, you can see me.
Yeah, I can see you. You're tuned in, dialed in. Good. We got a good size audience here. I'm excited about this conversation because we've had a lot of conversations, and that led up to a good discussion around this topic. And,
I've heard some of the previous conversations, so I think I'm going to be touching on some. There's some repeating themes going on through all of this, so I'm going to be hitting on that same old theme, perhaps in a different way, but the same themes.
But that's a good thing. That means we're identifying some proven techniques that others can apply in their M&A approach. That's a good thing.
Absolutely. Yeah.
If it's all different, then nobody knows what's going on. I think that's one of the biggest challenges in the industry, is it's operated in silos for so long that every organization I work with has their own way of doing things. And
silos, absolutely, so many silos.
Julie actually knows a lot about this because she works as part of the DealRoom team, heading client success. So she's responsible for onboarding clients and really gets involved with what their actual process is, since she has to actually tailor a tool to set up around their process. So I don't know. Would you agree with that, Julia? When you work with different companies, are you seeing like, hey, they're doing things the same way, or is there a big variance?
No, there's a pretty big variance, I would say. I mean, there's like a kind of similar thing everyone does, but no one's room looks the same, that's for sure.
So I think that's the thing. It's important that we share some of these practices and really start looking for those patterns. And the weird thing with this industry, it's not like financial services where we can start analyzing millions of transactions, credit card transactions or coins, crypto, whatever, and start making changes and improve that way, where we're using quantitative data set. But a lot of this is sort of people interaction driven, and we need more of these qualitative interviews to start identifying what are actual proven techniques to handle various situations in M&A. That was a good commercial for this conference, by the way. You got a joke for us to warm us up, Julia?
No.
Yeah, have a joke.
I was trying to think of more of like Shyla type jokes because those were so cute.
Toby's got one. You got one?
No, look, to be honest, Kison, I'm waking up here. Yeah, I should let everybody know. I'm here in Sydney, Australia, so I'm in a different time zone altogether here.
That's right.
But I've had a coffee. I'm waking up. Big
Very
coffee.
good. There you go.
Slap myself around the cheeks.
We got another minute. Yeah, I like this. I like the opening act yesterday. That was fun. Are you guys hanging out for today's happy hour?
Absolutely, yeah. No, that'd be good.
Are you doing another happy hour?
Well, it's not happy hour for me because I won't be drinking any alcohol. That's one to be sure. Not this time of the morning.
Yeah, you're totally fine. That's it's and I
something.
you don't have to drink. That's the thing. We welcome anybody. It's not like you have to have alcohol. I will be upfront though. I do have a bottle of champagne chilling in the fridge right now. But I think we are doing another happy hour. We're gonna make sure we don't end this conference with like the boring midday sort of crowd dissipate slowly with the flyby goodbyes. We're not going to do that. We're going to make sure we end this conference properly, the way all conferences should end, with a party. So we got a great lineup of who's who in M&A. They're going to tell stories about some of the deals they've worked on, and not just ordinary stories about some of the crazy things they've seen.
It's funny. M&A has got so many crazy things in it, and that's probably the reason why we do all this, because it can get crazy.
Oh, looks like we hit our hour.
Right on.
Here, let me.
So you do your introduction now.
Yeah. Do you want to keep the slide deck up? I guess we're going to keep it up.
Yeah. No, keep the slide deck up. Yeah.
All right, Julia. It's
I'm looking at a younger version of myself. That reminds me, I must update that picture sometime.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, I can run through a quick intro for you guys. This is Julia with DealRoom and our client success team, here to introduce our next session, which is post-merger integration. Don't just integrate, innovate. And
post-merger innovation.
Innovation. And for our speakers for this session, we have our own Kison Patel, CEO and founder of DealRoom. And we have Toby Tester, senior consultant and project manager at BTD.
That was great.
Right.
You're going to have to introduce me on all my calls now. All right. Well, thank you very much, Julia. I appreciate the introduction. Today, I have a pleasure of being here with Toby Tester, senior consultant and project manager at BTD. Toby has nearly 20 years of experience delivering strategic, financial, and operational value from dozens of M&A deals. I mean, for me too, I think just having several conversations with Toby, we've done interviews in the past, and I think our original sort of tie together was while I was actually writing this book, gathering ideas about different ways to look at the M&A process, how some concepts from Agile would apply to M&A, and really having some great conversations to flesh out some of the concepts I was working on with Toby. And he was actually kind enough to write the forewords for my book. So he's been a big advocate and a promoter, supporter of the initiatives that we've been working on here to improve the M&A approach. Toby, would you like to kick off with a brief discussion on what we're going to talk about today?
Thanks for the introduction there, Kison. Post-merger innovation. I'm sure a lot of people sort of, we'll go into the slides. And by the way, guys, there's not that many slides, I had about 30. And then Kison said, no, you're not going to go through 30 slides. So he was pretty ruthless, and he said, chop them all out. So he's got me down to about 10 or something. Post-merger innovation, it's one of those things, and I don't want to steal the thunder from my first slide, but I'm sure that a lot of people who are listening in, who are watching this now, have felt that more could be done. That, you go through, you do the work of, you go through the deal process and that sort of thing, then you go through the closing, then go through the integration process, and you think to yourself, we did a lot of the good things, but there's more that you could have done. And we didn't take the opportunity to go that extra step. And I call it innovation. It's basically finding out new ways of doing things that you could do to transform the organization. Because I think M&A, and this is the big thing about M&A, it is the most dramatic thing that can happen in an organization. There's nothing bigger in a corporate event-wise. And so it's an incredible window of opportunity to do things. And so I think that you should exploit that opportunity to not only integrate, but also innovate. There you go.
I like it. I think it's a great theme. So with that, I'd love to hear about what are the current issues M&A practitioners face today.
Yeah. Okay. Kison, as you said in the introduction, I've been involved in this for about 20 years. And when I first started, going back in time, integration, there was quite a traditional way of going about things, and people will be familiar with this. It's very much focused. I call it M&A as transaction. In other words, there's a definite approach to the way you do this sort of work. In other words, you do the deal, you negotiate, you close, and you integrate. An integration occurring sort of 60, 90, 100 days, and that sort of thing. But I call it transaction because it's got a very specific focus. In other words, you do the work, you get in there quick, and you get out. And when I look back 20 years ago, all the deals were very much about, I call it value capture. It's very short-term focus. And I know this was repeated before because I know I listened to Ben Halvanang on this one. It's a very short-term focus, and it's almost exclusively on cost synergies. It's like cost synergies. We zero in like nothing else exists. Just zero in on those cost synergies and limited business model change. And that's the way, when I started first working on M&A deals, that's how it was. But progressively, over time, a lot of the deals I've worked on, I'm sure a lot of people as well, and it is an increasing trend, and that organizations are not doing this just to capture sort of scale or to increase efficiencies or grow in their particular industry. They're looking at M&A as a means for transforming. In other words, changing what they do. Now, it's interesting. I was reading one report, I think it was Bain, and they said, for example, in 2019, 60% of all large deals were what you call scope deals. In other words, they were about changing what they do, and they were about revenue synergies. And so there's an increasing trend across the board for M&A to be more focused on scope, looking at M&A as a means for transforming what they do. That means changing their operating model, changing their business model. And that's just an increasing trend. But what it means, and again, it's a repeating theme that's come across before, is that you have to change what you do, the way you approach this. And that's the reason why, Kison, we were talking about this last year, and when you wrote the book Agile M&A, because it does capture that notion that the modus operandi, the way we go about it, needs to change to basically cater for M&A as a means for transforming what you do, not as a transaction. So there you go. That's a fairly long answer and that sort of thing. So Kison, you butt in and ask me the next question, or,
Oh, I'm going to follow our slides here and balance with my notes in front of me too. Well, no, that was a really good definition of what the challenges are. And I think you're right. I think just the very nature of our deals are prompting a reason to change and rethink things as we know it. And getting a little bit more into that, what do you see as the difference? Because I know we've brought it up a handful of times about agility in the M&A process and contrasting between traditional M&A and agile.
Yeah, actually, yeah. Before I literally approach this slide, let me just go back on that sort of the earlier slide, because there was something I wanted to say, and it's really just to make that definition about transaction. No, go back to the earlier one. Go back to the beginning one.
Yeah, hold on.
No, you're jumping ahead. Go back.
Okay, hold on.
No, you're going the wrong way now.
There you go. Sorry.
Yeah, go back to that one.
A little buttons are out of control there. Apologize.
Okay. The thing is, and this is really the key point, it's a bit of a mindset thing here. And that is that when you approach M&A, there needs to be a shift away from looking at M&A as transaction to looking at M&A as transformation. And that means that your focus is not on business continuity or that's important, but you should also be looking at opportunity. Playbook wise, again, you see, there is not a standard playbook to this sort of thing. I know that they're often seen as playbooks, but there isn't a standard playbook. That's something you come up with for that particular transaction. There's a long-term growth focus. So in other words, what we need to do is always shift away from just looking at what you need to do in the short term towards something that's in the long term. And I think when it comes to risk management, it's taking a lot more sort of opportunistic view towards risks. So instead of avoiding or minimizing risk, recognize the fact you are taking risks, small irrevocable risks, but that's what you're doing. And the other thing is that when it comes to value is often defined pre-deal, because often that's part of the process you do through due diligence and valuation. But often that value in actual fact is there to get the deal across the line. But there's a lot more value that could be realized, and it's those significant pools of opportunity. And again, I've heard, this is a repeating theme, by the way, is that we tend not to look, we tend to blinker ourselves and not see the other opportunities for value. And there could be a whole range of things, but we tend to shut ourselves off a bit. And that's important, that when you're looking at M&A and transport, you need to widen the aperture and have a much broader view of all the opportunities that are available. And then when it comes to innovation, creating new ways of working, motivation, instead of being driven by time and tactics, having basically been driven more by purpose. Now, I'm not talking about deal purpose, but I'll tell you what, having purpose is such an important thing. I remember the book by Simon Sinek, always start with why. Always say, why are you doing this deal? And that's such an important thing. And that whole way of thinking, having that mindset is what M&A as transformation is all about. And I think I'll just finish off with one liner, then you can go on to the next slide. And that is that the M&A, a transactional approach to M&A will not deliver transformational results. So there has to be a mindset change to shift away from transaction to transformation. There we go.
Now we can talk about the difference.
There we can now talk about the difference. Okay. Look, I think, I've worked, it's interesting, Kison, because I've actually worked Agile, and I've used Agile practices as part of an M&A deal. And I did it quite some time ago. It's about 13 years ago. And, when I did it, it was for a digital services business, and it worked incredibly well, really good. But it doesn't work all the time because, and as I've done on deals sort of after that, that there's a need to kind of like have a sort of more of a dualistic approach. In other words, there's a sort of a traditional view. In other words, that's usually the waterfall approach. And then there's the Agile. And often the best approach I find, especially if you want to introduce Agile, is to take more of a hybrid approach. In other words, it's a kind of a best of breed. Traditional, often scale deals, i.e. that's the deals that are more sort of geared towards cost efficiencies, that sort of thing. You would actually use those tried and tested practices because they work. When I'm talking for examples here, so if you're integrating sort of back office systems, integrating assets, looking at functional integration, the traditional approach works well because it's deterministic. And so where you have a high degree of determinism, you know what you're doing, you've done it before, it's a process you've been through, then a traditional approach works well. The thing is that if you're looking at capturing revenue synergies, then there's a certain degree of uncertainty and ambiguity. It's not clear cut. Revenue synergies is a good deal harder, and there's a different approach that you take. And that's where I'd recommend that you take that agile approach in the way you work when it comes to those revenue synergies. For example, if you're looking at product, doing some product changes, you're looking at how you might improve your customer engagement, looking at how you can tweak your profit model. All of these things work together in terms of delivering sort of revenue synergies. But that begs a different approach to the traditional, and that's where agile would come into it. So you can do the both, take a best of breed approach.
Let's talk about the team structures. What's the difference?
This has been spoken before. I'll tell you something. I was listening to some of the previous presentations. I think everybody's hit on the same one. I mean, haven't they?
To a degree, but this is new thinking for a lot of companies. You know that. Yeah. I wish I had hey, we should have took a poll. How many people are actually approaching integration without a pure functional sort of organization or way of structuring their approach?
Yeah, it's interesting.
Primarily cross-functional teams focused on side drivers.
The funny thing is that a good deal of deals that I've worked on, and actually take the functional approach. In other words, we've seen it before. You have a post-merger integration team, and it goes along the traditional sort of functional lines. You have an HR team, you have a marketing, you have sales, you got product, you got technology, you got legal, you got property, and it goes on, and it works on those sort of functional divisions. And that's almost like the default mode. The challenge with that is it is silo-wise, and I think what happens is that, and this is, I think, part of the problem, is that M&A, by its very nature, is actually cross-functional. The way value gets delivered is cross-functional. The way revenues work, revenue synergies, is cross-functional. So we're taking it like a vertical view of an organization, but in actual fact, what we're delivering is actually cross-functional. It's actually horizontal. So it makes sense to change your team structure and to align your team according to what are the key drivers. Now, every M&A deal, if you're going through, they're a part of the whole integration strategy. There'll be just a few major drivers. One might be around cost, perhaps. You're reducing cost, maybe it's back office or whatever. Another one would be around product, perhaps, or the customer experience. But the thing is that whatever those key drivers are, you arrange your teams accordingly to those drivers. Now, here's the thing. This is where I come back to the agile thing before, is that you may say, well, look, the modus operandi for a couple of those teams may be the traditional approach, because that makes sense, because what you're delivering is perhaps cost. The work is deterministic, it's clear, you've done it before, and there's reduced ambiguity. So the less risky approach is to take your traditional waterfall path. But for one team, perhaps, or maybe two, you may take the agile path. In other words, for those revenue synergies that are where there's a certain degree of ambiguity, there's a certain amount of discovery, a certain amount of experimentation, but also there's a certain degree of complexity here as well, because revenue it works differently. If you want to be able to track, manage, and deliver revenue synergies, it is a different way. And so it lends itself well to the agile approach. And so you can see from that diagram, that's cross-functional team approach is a good way of working. And what you can do, of course, is have one of those teams actually have their the way they work, the way they produce their deliverables, where they manage their work. They can indeed use the agile processes that I'm sure many people will be familiar with.
People are stuck on their ways. I'm curious on your thoughts about how you would actually get a company that follows a traditional, very functional driven approach to their team structure to sort of look, experiment, or shift in this direction.
Yeah, look, it's a hard one, this one, because it's interesting. Let me tell you a story here, because I had great success using the agile approach on one particular organization, and it worked fabulously. And then I went to work with another organization, similar acquisition, we were integrating, and I wanted to introduce the agile approach. And I was said, look, no, we're not there. This is not for us. We have a particular approach. This is the way we do things. This is the way we're structured. And pretty much the answer was no. And so you need to be careful here that if you're going to take the Agile path, it needs to have endorsement. It needs to have support from the senior executives. It's something that certainly needs a lot of leadership, but also coaching as well. So, you do need to have that strong level of coaching to staff and the executives to help promote this way of working. But often it's a case of actually taking just a few steps, just doing a few things. We're not talking about the whole thing about, burn down charts, sprints and scrums. You can just take little steps, some that, are acceptable, that people are ready to, to follow, and make it fun, by the way. And I'll get on to fun later on because I think having fun in this is such an important thing. Take those small steps, but it's often like a case like give it a go. And what I'm saying here, and this diagram really shows it, you can actually say, well, look, let's arrange some teams here. We'll do the work, the major bulk of the work. We can follow the traditional path, follow your tried and tested practices, but we're going to create a little team over here. And that's our team who are going to capture those additional opportunities that perhaps this deal has, this full potential that it has to offer. Let's see how this team works and try it out and see it, because there's nothing like doing it.
So basically augment your existing approach with a cross-functional team, test it out. Yep. If it looks like it's turning disastrous, disband it and go back to the way things work.
One thing, I would recommend you do it all at once, Kison, go fully agile. Now that'd be a recipe for disaster.
Right. But then as you see some success, then you can continue to tack on.
Absolutely, and try it out. It's like a lot of things. You just got to do it. And there's nothing complex about agile in a way. I think in many ways that it can quite come. Culturally, it can be a little bit challenging, but I think in many ways people fall into it quite well.
Cool. Tell me about this book and why is my name?
Hey, what's this book? Have I seen this book before? Yeah. Game plans in place. Kison, we were working on this one together last year, reviewing the book, and it was great to write the.
I think right about this time too. Well, this was just when it started. We were in the editing phase, and
yeah, that's right.
I needed somebody to write the forwards and pulled your name out of a hat.
Yeah. Look, I think it's timely. I think that we are talking about agile because it is important. I think in M&A, particularly as I said earlier on before, that we are using M&A as a means for transforming, as a means of innovating. And it's funny, we are in this pandemic, and I'm not going to go into that, but it's been written about plenty of times. We are in a time where this pandemic is going to be the great catalyst for change. We know that there's going to be a heck of a lot of change. Business models have been weakened by this whole pandemic. Balance sheets need to be cleaned up, and if organizations are looking to fix themselves up, get themselves back onto the growth path, well, the shortcut to growth always is M&A as opposed to the organic approach. And if you're going to use M&A, well, then we need to go about it a bit more intelligently. And the good thing about Agile is that it creates the environment through which innovation can occur, transformation can occur, because it's much wider in the way you think about the work that you needed to do. And it embraces a way of working, a way of thinking, and a way of doing, whereby you are thinking about what can we do? What are the opportunities that we can be exploiting here, and give them a go. And the big benefit, of course, of Agile is that because it works on these short-term cycles and this notion of experimentation, or the sort of build, measure, learn type approach, you can quickly, iteratively go through looking for what those value opportunities are, and actually see if you can actually deliver upon them. And it's different, and it works well with revenue, and that's the big thing. Agile and the revenue synergies goes well together. Now, the two big things in the book I liked was game plans and plays. And those are two interesting sort of features, and I can go into that. So maybe the next slide there, Keith.
Hey, before I get to the next slide, you had some criticism for me too.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm open to it. I like taking the shots and use it as or sort of a means to improve.
Remind me what criticism, because I did make a few. So give me.
Told me I left out leadership and a lot of change management.
Yeah, you did, and I think that the issue is, so if I was to do a critique, I think Kison, hope you can take this one well.
I'm fine. Not that anybody else would notice or care in front. My mom's watching.
Yeah, I think the thing is that I call it there's a holy. Let me put it this way: there's a holy trinity for M&A success. There's three things that you've got to get right. Number one, which is the most important one of all, which your previous session was all about, was about leadership. It is fundamentally a leadership thing, and if you don't have the leadership, you haven't got anything, a failed deal, a failed merger is a failure in leadership. And okay, the book didn't talk about that, but it's important to do this because if you don't have the leadership, nothing else follows, because leadership is all about mindset. It's about having those people adopting certain behaviors that promote this agile way of working. And so that's the one big thing. The other big thing, of course, is teams and the way teams work. Again, I'm sure a lot of people who are listening on this, when they look at what was successful, what was the defining thing that made that particular transaction, that integration, so successful? I bet you a lot of people will say it comes down to the teams. When I look at the things and the deals I worked on, I think, boy, God, that was a successful M&A deal. And I'll put it down to the people. The teams, they just clicked. They worked together so well. And I think it comes down to that leadership, and it comes down to teams. Leader, follower, and also followers are great leaders. And that's the other thing, is that leadership is not something that's contained within one individual right up there. Although, having said that, and I've heard before, having a really good integration manager who embodies all this mindset of behavior is absolutely critical. Having said that, though, everybody are leaders in their own particular way, and they can take that leadership view, which means adopting those sorts of behaviors that embrace this more agile way of working. So there you go, holy trinity of success. I've done leadership, I've done team, and then we come to process. But you've got to have the leadership, the team, and the process. And I think in respect to Kison, I think the book was very good. It was very process focused.
Hey, I appreciate that. I want to make sure there's a reality check. And I think Toby's absolutely right. Those are some areas that I didn't get into. We really focused more on the project management aspect, but the model is definitely expandable. And that's what we're currently doing. We're open sourcing the whole thing. We're putting it online.
Yeah, absolutely.
Really accessible.
And I think the great thing is, sorry, Kison.
I was just going to mention, you're writing some plays, and it seems like we're almost up to like a dozen different practitioners that want to contribute.
Yeah, well, this is the exciting thing, and this is the good thing, because, and I said this to you before, Kison, is that, I was thinking of writing something like this, and I said, darn it, he's doing it. Oh God, and I was thinking of writing because I thought Agile M&A, it was good you wrote the book because someone had to, so you did it, so that's good. But the great thing is, it's a starting block. You can build upon this. Okay, and create that movement to say, here's some set of processes, here's a sort of way of going about it. And the book goes very well in terms of the origins of Agile, which is really important, by the way, where it all came from. Because we talk about Agile, but for example, when we talk about Agile, it all comes back down to a Harvard Business Review article that was written back in 1986. I think it was called the New Product Development Game. Maybe Agile has an earlier origins, but that for me was a defining article. I'm not sure if people know that one. You can Google it. But anyway, it's an excellent starting point, building block from which we can go forward through and actually build more capability around using Agile in M&A.
Hey, I appreciate that, Toby. Let me jump to the next slide here.
Next slide, game plans and plays.
Walk me
I
through
like
it.
this.
Yeah, walk me through this and how they work together.
Yes. Okay. Two big concepts, not complicated, and I know this has been touched on before. Game plans. Let me just talk about the game plans differently. What we got to do is we got to move away from the standardized, scripted sort of playbook approach, because I think playbooks are inherently, they're good in one aspect. If every transaction was going to be the same and everything works the same way, then having a standardized playbook is good. But what we all know is that every transaction, that's probably the reason why we do this work, every transaction is unique. It's different challenges, different people, culture, ways of doing things, different challenges. And so the standardized sort of playbook approach really starts to break down. So it's important then to have an alternative approach that actually replaces the playbook. And the game plan is that alternative. And a game plan, you don't have one playbook, for example, like a playbook might cover the entire deal cycle, but you can have a number of game plans. It's very much determined by the transaction itself. If you can see on that diagram, I got 4. It may not be 4, maybe it's 2 or 3. The deal will determine that. But what the game plan is really, as I've shown there, in actual fact, it's just a collection of plays. And I'll go into plays in a minute because plays are kind of interesting. The game plan is a collection of plays. So you go from the bottom up, from having done a number of plays, you then go ahead and produce the game plan, which effectively has the plan in it and the approach in terms of where you're going to execute that game plan. And the interesting, and this is where it's different, if I can explain, a game plan, by virtue of the fact you're actually you're doing plays before, game plan becomes an implicit way of working. In other words, it's in the people's minds as to the way they're going to approach the work and do that. It doesn't need to be spelt out in detail, much like a playbook does, like a cookbook, do this, do this, do this, do this. It's not quite like that. For example, a great game plan will be up on the wall. And it could be just something that's drawn up on a big wall and say, here's our game plan. And it's something that's a living, breathing way of working, which shows you the plans. It shows you the sprints perhaps you're going to be doing. It shows you the retrospectives that you might be doing as part of that game plan. But it's something that's living, it's dynamic, it's up on the wall, and it engages people better than, say, the more traditional playbook approach.
So if we want to get a little deeper here and sort of break down the actual mechanics of what an individual play looks like, can you walk me through that, Toby?
Yeah. So I think with a play, and this is what I do like plays, and they're kind of interesting. And perhaps if I can explain to people listening and watching this what a play really is. A play really is kind of like a structured conversation. It's a way of making observations, pulling together ideas, and coming up with plans for delivering value. And plays are like that. You can almost think of it like a workshop, but it doesn't have to be a workshop. It could be just like a 5-minute get together. It could be a 30-minute get together. It could be a full day exercise. The thing is, it's essentially an exercise where people come together and they're there to achieve a particular purpose. And a play can be something that can follow a familiar and repeatable script. In other words, what's the purpose of this play? When do you use it? How many people get involved? If you're going to run this play, how much time do you need to prepare for the play? What's the degree of difficulty? Now, some plays are easy, and I'll get into this because I'm going to give some few examples after this. Some are easy, some are hard. And then there's some process steps in terms of what are the steps that you go through if you're going to run this particular play? And then what's the output? And at the heart of every play, there's a tool or a technique. And that's the thing, is that one of the things is that in M&A is that there are a multitude of tools and techniques you can apply. The challenge is knowing, when to use it and how you use it. And that's what the play does. It really encapsulates a tool or a technique and gets people involved in it and to say, okay, so this is how we go about these are the steps. It's funny, Kison, I know you've got a lot of templates up there and they're all everywhere. This goes beyond a template. This is much more than a template. You're actually saying, well, look, here's a script, but here's a tool, and this is how you do it. So it's a much more comprehensive way of following a particular process.
Oh, couldn't the templates fall within the script?
Yes, you can use a template. So you can have a template inside it. It could be a tool. The whole idea of the play is it's essentially how do people come together and go through and make a certain whatever the challenge they're trying to overcome or what exercise they want to do. And I'll come into examples so it will all become clear. And then you go through those steps, and then there'll be maybe a template inside it or a tool.
Let's dig into some of these examples and see
right.
Like
now, this is it. Now, I thought I'd come up with the easiest one of all, and I don't think anybody hasn't done a SWOT. It's the most popular thing out there, and the idea here is if you can just imagine it. So you may say, let's go ahead and do a strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Fantastic. Well, wouldn't it be great if, say, for example, you had a play around that to say, here's a SWOT. Okay, who should I invite? How long do I need to prepare for it? How difficult is it? What are the steps you've got to go through to make sure that you're doing this properly? And what's the purpose of doing this SWOT? So going through all of that. And the idea is to have a play that's scripted in a way that shows you in a systematic and disciplined way how you might run something like a SWOT. Instead of just drawing something up and getting a bunch of people in a room, actually going through a very deliberate, focused, structured way of doing a SWOT. And that's just one. And that's the easiest one of all, by the way. There are plenty of plays, and I know that it's in the book Agile M&A, you've got some plays listed. So this is an example of a very simple play that you could do, and a lot of people will want to do this to help sort of get some innovation insights. In other words, you may have a particular innovation objective you want to achieve out of this, and so it'll be driven by a particular purpose. So it's one of those first things you might want to do to help develop some insights, create some ideas that then would lead into potentially another play.
Let's look at some more examples here.
Right. So as we go into this, and I hope people sort of follow this, is that we're talking much more than templates here. What we're talking about is lots of little plays that in aggregate come up with an overall game plan. And what the idea is that as you do each play, it creates an additional level of insight. It gets you those aha moments. We need to be doing this, or we need to be doing that. And that helps develop your plans. It helps understand where your risks are, where your opportunities are. And so these are collaborative team exercises. You're always doing this with the team. And here we go. Here's another one. Develop the operating model. Now, I always try and do an operating model. It's always important to understand where you're currently at. In other words, what is the operating model? How are you currently working? And then perhaps at the end, what's your target operating model? So when you have the integrated businesses together, what does that target operating model actually look like? And so this is something that I encourage people to do. It's important. It creates an extra level of insight into what you want to achieve. And I should say that an operating model is a lot more than, say, an organization chart. So it brings together a lot of things. And so again, if you take the operating model approach, and here, by the way, is it's called the operating model canvas. Don't we all love canvases, eh? The great thing about canvases is it's all done with Post-it notes. The whole idea is highly interactive. You can put all this up on a wall, one big wall, and start mapping it. And here, for example, you might have a particular focus. Say, for example, you just want to look at the value chain, and that's a key one. For example, you want to map out the order to cash process. So map that out, because that might be the area that you want to change. There might be a certain level of innovative change that you want to go through. And that might be the area. Or it could be in procurement. It could be in the way your organization is structured. But it's important to understand that the organization and the way you structure your organization is there to support the value chain. And so it's important to have that. And then finally, with the operating model, this is why I like the operating model, it comes back down to value propositions in terms of what are the value propositions you're delivering to the customer. So again, it's a very long answer there, but again, it follows a particular script. How many people need to get involved, how much time you need to spend on it, what the degree of difficulty. This is a more difficult exercise, so definitely it's the sort of area that needs a certain element of coaching and strong facilitation. And there's a certain degree of preparation for this. But this is something that for a play you might want to repeat a few times, perhaps, but it's an essential play. So it's a good one. I encourage people to look at the operating model in terms of where we are now, what's the target operating model, and where the potential gaps are, because this is an excellent means of actually gathering additional insights, opportunities, also risks, but also defines potential of the plans. And then this becomes the output from this becomes the input to another play. Right. Okay. Now this one's another play. Now, again, these are all examples of plays. Now I talked about this is the title of this session is called Post-Merger Innovation. So I wanted to sort of introduce sort of like other plays that really are geared very much towards creating those sorts of innovation insights. And so here I'm using a particular based on a particular tool or a book that people might know called 10 Types of Innovation, which is a very popular book about innovation and how you might introduce innovative changes in your organization. Again, you see, M&A is such an incredible opportunity to deliver innovative changes in the organization. It's not something that you do later on. I always encourage people to bring it forward, because the opportunities are in those innovations, those revenue synergies, far more than potentially what the cost synergies are. And so this is another important play, and it can be a precursor to more detailed innovative thinking about certain areas. So very simple. Look at your key innovation areas. Again, this follows a book, which there are 10 types of innovation, and then start going through the process of looking at your profit model. For example, what your profit model is, describe it, your potential gaps or issues, and perhaps what it could look like in the future. And this process helps define your capabilities as well, in terms of what are the things that you want to be really good at that distinguish you from your competitors. So, if you're getting those sort of capability insights, this is a very good play. Again, it's another example. And so that's it, and uses something called the Innovation Canvas.
Now, when we look at details on when and where to use these plays,
Yeah.
you wouldn't mind taking us there?
Now, Kison, we talked about this a while ago, and I think what this is, and this goes on sort of extending beyond the book, which has some plays in it, and I think for me that what this is that there's essentially a play for every occasion. If you can think of it as a game plan as being a collection of plays, that's what your M&A deal is. It really is a collection of plays. And when you do a play, what you're really doing is you're saying, well, what are the transformational innovation hotspots that I really want to go for? In which case, whatever that deal is, whatever the unique characteristics of the deal, you choose the certain plays that are going to work for that particular transaction. In other words, we need to get some more insights. We need to start some deeper thinking. And that's where these plays come into it. Now here, I have shown quite a few I've listed here. The idea is that you take an a la carte approach. You know, this is where it's so different to a playbook. A playbook, you just do this, you do this, you do this, you do this. Here, what we're saying here is, no, don't do that. Just choose the plays that you think are going to be relevant for your particular transaction, that are important, and go ahead and run those. And so I'll give you some examples here. And I've grouped them accordingly. Strategic management. There are certain plays. For example, the acquisition rationale. There's a play around that. SWOT. Okay, we've done SWOT. Competitor complementar mapping, innovation mapping, opportunity mapping, strategic intent, you know, defining your deal purpose. These are so important. That's a play again, because again, you're gathering people around to find out what that deal purpose is. Target business model, so important. There's another play around that. These are strategy management plays. Then you have transaction management plays. Again, there are standard ways of things. If you're going to go ahead and say, for example, kick off due diligence, that's a play. And you can go through, there's a script, there's a certain things you can do around due diligence that sets it up and kick off the whole due diligence process. Again, that's a play. I've got people, leadership, culture, program management, deal value, which is so important here. And I think that perhaps my observation, that'll be, you know, just what other people think, that we often don't delve into this hard enough. I think when we look into value and the opportunities an M&A deal might have to offer, we tend to rely exclusively on spreadsheets, which is a good way of doing it, but we don't go deeper and look into the operating model and look at the value chain in terms of the deal levers and how they work together in terms of delivering deal value. Again, a number of techniques, they're out there, they're known. What I'd love to be able to see, and I haven't done a lot of them, but I'd love to see it, is have plays around each one of these. And this is where I'm building upon the book, Kison, is to say, here's a bunch of plays you could do. So around target operating model, value chain mapping, capability mapping, value lever mapping. These are all particular techniques. Again, it's a play. Team management. Teams are so important, and then there are a number of team plays you can do. And then I've got product and customer plays, customer journey mapping, value proposition mapping, product road mapping, customer interviews. Each one of these is particularly important. I'll mention customer interview because that one actually triggers a thought in my mind, is that so often in deals, we talk to our shareholders, we talk to staff. We tend to sometimes forget about the customers in terms of what a deal might have for customers. And they're actually the final arbiter of any kind of M&A deal. They're the arbiter of success. And sometimes we don't talk enough to customers. So customer plays are really important. In other words, actually going out and interviewing, talking to customers about a potential deal that you might be making, or at least using them as a sounding board before inking any kind of deal. These are important. So, you know, having customer interviews and actually having a play around that is so important. What I'm saying here, a la carte selection, there's a play for every occasion.
This will be the next conference, just review plays, play sharing.
Well, you know, the thing is, and what I wanted to do here is to make this sort of deeply practical, you know, so, you know, we can talk at a high level about, you know, broad things we want to do. And, you know, what I was keen to do is make it quite specific to say there are some serious things you can actually do, you know, practical steps you can take. If you're doing any kind of looking for additional insights, looking for a particular innovation in a certain area, there's a play for it.
Let's talk about how this stuff comes together and ties back to our topic of breeding innovation.
Indeed. You know, and this is it. Now, I talk about plays, but I just wanted to put an extra spin on this one. And it's a leadership thing again. And it's the one about facilitation. Plays are innovative ways of creating business breakthroughs. That's what they are. You know, if you're looking to be more innovative in what you do, then plays are an excellent way of going about it. But there needs to be sort of 4, I call them advantage points or frames. It's a mental model. It's a way of framing the work you do. And if you're running this sort of thing, there's two broad approaches. You have the left brain approach and you have the right brain approach. We all understand that. In other words, we know that there's an art and a science to everything we do. Let me look at the right brain first. Theatre and culture. Innovation is theatre. The idea here is that when you approach this sort of work, is that if you take this vantage point of thinking about what you're doing as being theatre, it has a way of breaking down the defenses. And I think theatre is very important because when you're doing a deal and you're merging two organizations, there's going to be a certain degree of cultural dissonance that you're going to have. In other words, people are kind of concerned about their own jobs, their own future. And I know this was mentioned just before in the earlier session. And you're not going to sometimes get that participation or the that you need from people. And a good way to get over that is to take that more theatrical way of looking at what we do. It's funny, we call it a play. I call it a play. It's a script. And the people who are doing the work in the team are actors. They're the ones who actually are acting out these roles, acting out in terms of, you know, what we could be doing differently as part of this particular deal. So it's kind of like a bit of an improv thing as well. The idea is to make it fun and interesting, that this is something about a show and we're getting this show on the road. And so it's capturing that notion of theatre. It has a way of breaking down defenses, ways of making it fun, engaging. This is meant to be, people are meant to have a good time. It really is, you know. And if you approach plays in that sort of theatrical approach, you're going to get a good deal of engagement from that, and people will be. It's fun, it's enjoyable, and the whole idea is to make it an engaging exercise where people can play their part. Now, if I get onto the culture side, and this is it, and this is perhaps, you know, what we're here for, and I think it plays again good for this, is to promote that innovation culture. And that means that what we're really here to say is that innovation is not something that occurs from the CEO or it comes from the senior executives. It doesn't come from the R&D lab. It doesn't come from external consultants. It comes from the individuals themselves. You know, and the incredible thing is, and I'm sure a lot of people who listen to this will agree, the best ideas always come from the coalface. You know, you don't go to the senior executives. They have understood some ideas about it, but you talk to the individuals who actually, whose job it is, working at the coalface, will have the ideas and the thoughts. What they need is they need the permission to come out and actually say, well, what about doing this? Or what about doing that? And that's about creating that sort of culture whereby people are invited, and that's what these plays are about, invited to actually come up and say, well, what about this? And how about do we do that? And be given that kind of permission to actually come up with those ideas and make sure they're being listened and heard, and that those ideas are being captured. And that's that sort of more cultural aspect. So you can see there's that right brain thing. I'm just seeing how I'm doing for time here, so I better wrap up quickly. If I go on to the left brain side, and this is the important thing about plays. Plays are systems thinking. In other words, the idea here is to always go down to the nuts and bolts of what you're doing and actually making those system connections of what you're doing. And that's what systems thinking is about. And that is always looking at value, breaking down value down to the individual levers or the drivers of value, and to see the way they connect together. For example, like revenue synergies actually can be quite complicated, you know, and it's understanding what are the levers that you need to be pressing on to actually deliver that value. And that's where systems thinking comes in. So it's a different mode of thought and a way of facilitation and engaging to help break down everything down to its essential nuts and bolts. And the final thing is science. Science, you know, I'll just break out here because one of the best books on innovation I took up was by Eric Ries and the Lean Startup. But if anybody ever reads the Lean Startup, they know that really what it is, actual fact, it's just all about the scientific method. And so it's that build, measure, and learn. And so what we're doing here is we are exploring, we're experimenting, we're building, we're learning. And so to encourage that sort of way of thinking, of being very logical in our approach, and always measuring what we do. And that's what the plays need to be. In actual fact, these plays could be occupying anywhere in this sort of the scientific method. They could be perhaps framing ideas. It could be around planning. It could be about measuring, or it could be learning. Effectively, it's following that scientific method. So operate plays from those 4 different vantage points to help get the maximum benefit from this.
All right.
I'm conscious of time here. Wrapping up,
yeah,
indeed.
What are the takeaways for companies looking to make their M&A process more innovative?
Big wrap up. Here we go. Use M&A to transform, not transact. Focus on revenue. As always, the pools of opportunity are far greater. Don't look at the here and now, those simple, well, I'm not saying you don't look at them. Of course you look at them, but don't look at them exclusively. Always look at M&A as transformation, and I think that's the better way. It's a much more enlightened way about getting things. Use plays to innovate. Plays are an incredible way of actually engaging, getting participation, and making something that's interactive, engaging, and fun. Game plans, not playbooks. And this comes down to the whole Agile concept. That is that the playbooks are replaced by game plans, which are more dynamic plans. It goes up on the wall, post-it notes. It's not something you write in detail, and they represent the collection of plays. And finally, and the big final, the biggest one of all, it all begins and ends with leadership. Everything I've said, to be honest, one way or another, is about leadership, and having those mindset, the behaviors to help sort of encourage a new way of working, a different way of working on deals, doing the post-merger integration, and calling it post-merger innovation.
That was awesome. I don't have a lot of Q&A. I have one here about how integration budgets are determined for transformational M&A. That's almost a topic of its own.
Well, that's a big topic. Wow. The funny thing is about budgets is that sometimes, it's good to get a budget. Some like organizations like, we'll say, oh, by the way, you've got $10 million budget for the integration phase. Sometimes you don't even have one because it actually wasn't even budgeted for, which is terrible.
Hey, I would put that out there. If anybody wants to cover this topic, I'm really interested in it.
It's an interesting one. I think there's a couple of answers here. One is that obviously there's a budget which you fix on the what I call the traditional. So like where there's the functional integration, you really do need to do that. When it comes to the innovative work I was talking about and looking for gaining benefits from revenue, there's a certain self-funding element in that. And so, in a way, you need to be able to start getting the returns and reinvesting those returns into further innovation. So, I think there's a mixture, a bit of both there.
Great. Hey, Toby, I appreciate the conversation. Thanks for helping us support this event.
Good.
Everybody,
look, I hope that what I've been saying has been interesting. Look, I'm passionate about this. By the way, guys, anyone on LinkedIn with me, talk to me about this further. These are a bunch of ideas I've discussed with Kison before. I think there's a lot of opportunity here to develop the practice and to develop the notion of plays that you can use in any area where you want to delve into certain transformational innovation hotspots.
Thank you, Toby. Let's give a big round of applause, everybody. Oop, that's the theme. There you go. All right, let's get ready for our next one. We got the Google team.
Is it working? Yeah. Woohoo.
Yeah, hey, there you are. All right. Big Chief is here.
No. Just bring later.
Liquor? You guys got to get him primed up for the liquor.
Yeah, we did. It was that was what I was looking on just before this. And unfortunately, that's why I missed the happy hour. It sounds like it was a great one. So yeah, I had a couple.
Wild. There's a little bit, the comedy show part was recorded. So I can get that over to you at some point, but then we went dark. Oh, that reminds me. We're actually going to cut the stream off here.
Thank you. Yeah.
So give me 1 second. Hey, those of you that have been watching on the stream, Appreciate it. The next couple sessions are going offline. So we're going to say goodbye, but follow us, M&A Science. It's great content for anybody in M&A. Bye.